Welcome back to Background Historian. In this journey, we travel east, to the lands of the Yellow River, where the earliest Chinese dynasties are said to have risen. Here, myth and history intertwine, stories of great floods, of sage kings, of dynasties remembered more in legend than in stone. We begin with the Xia, a dynasty shrouded in mystery, perhaps more myth than fact, yet central to the Chinese imagination of beginnings. Then we move to the Shang, the first dynasty confirmed by archaeology, whose bronzes, oracle bones, and royal tombs give us a vivid picture of life more than 3,000 years ago. This is a story of origins, of rivers and floods, of kings and queens, of ancestors and gods, of warfare and artistry. It is a story of how a civilization began, how it was remembered, and how its echoes still shape China and the world today. So settle in, let the Yellow River's currents guide you, and join me as we step into the dawn of Chinese civilization. When we speak of the beginnings of China, we are speaking of a land shaped by rivers. The Great Yellow River, known as the Huanghe, cuts across northern China like a winding dragon, carrying with it not only water but also silt, rich and dangerous. This river has been called both the Mother of China and China's Sorrow. It nourished the first farmers, yet it flooded with devastating force. Along its banks, thousands of years ago, the first communities that would become dynasties began to take shape. This first part of our series sets the stage. Before we speak of the Xia or Shang kings, we must step back into the Neolithic cultures, into the landscapes and lives of the people who came before. We must see how geography shaped society, how myths explained the chaos of nature, and how small villages grew into kingdoms. The cradle of Chinese civilization was not a single palace or a single ruler. It was the land itself, its rivers, its soil, and the people who learned to thrive upon it. The Yellow River Valley. The Yellow River begins in the mountains of Tibet, flowing eastward across thousands of kilometers before emptying into the Bohai Sea. Along its course, it picks up vast amounts of loess, a fine yellowish soil. This soil, deposited on the plains, gave the river its name and made the land fertile. Farmers could grow millet, an early staple crop, in the silty earth with great success. But the river was not gentle. It flooded unpredictably, changing course, destroying villages, and drowning fields. To live in the Yellow River Valley was to live with constant risk. Over time, this shaped a society where cooperation was essential, where irrigation, dikes, and communal labor were as important as the harvest itself. This balance between danger and sustenance is reflected in the myths of early China, especially the story of Yu the Great, who tamed the floods. We will explore Yu more deeply in part 2, but even here we can see how geography shaped legend. The river was so central to life that its control became the foundation of kingship itself. Neolithic roots, Yangshao and Longshan. Before dynasties, there were cultures, communities that laid the groundwork for what was to come. Two of the most important were the Yangshao and Longshan cultures. The Yangshao culture, circa 5000 to 3000 BCE, flourished along the middle Yellow River. Villages consisted of round or square houses built partly underground, grouped around central courtyards. Farmers grew millet and raised pigs, dogs, and chickens. They decorated pottery with painted geometric designs and fish motifs. Life was communal, with evidence of shared storage and collective ritual. Later came the Longshan culture, circa 3000 to 1900 BCE. Here, we begin to see the outlines of something more like a state. Villages were fortified with rammed earth walls, suggesting conflict. Pottery was now wheel-made, thin, and black, showing technical skill. Social stratification appeared, some burials were rich with jade ornaments, others plain. The Longshan period marks a turning point from egalitarian villages to hierarchical chiefdoms. It is from this foundation that the Xia dynasty is said to have emerged. Archaeologists see in Longshan the seeds of kingship, of organized warfare, of ritual power. Myths remember this transformation as the deeds of legendary rulers. The world of ancestors. Even before written history, Chinese society placed great importance on ancestors. Graves were carefully prepared, sometimes with jade ornaments or offerings of food. In the Neolithic period, burial practices reveal not only reverence for the dead but also beliefs about hierarchy and continuity. The dead were not gone. They were present, influencing the living. To honor them was to ensure prosperity, to neglect them was to invite misfortune. This worldview would continue into the Xia, Shang, and all later dynasties. It was one of the enduring threads of Chinese civilization, linking people to their past in an unbroken chain. Myth and memory. When later historians like Sima Qian wrote about the Xia dynasty, they were already looking back through a haze of centuries. What they preserved were not straightforward records but myths, stories of sage kings, tyrants, floods, and divine mandate. But myths are not empty tales. They preserve memory, shaped into narrative. The floods of the Yellow River, the rise of clans, the struggle for power, all were remembered in the form of stories. When we hear of you the Great taming the waters, or of King Zhou's cruelty leading to downfall, we are hearing echoes of real struggles, translated into legend. This blending of myth and history is what makes the early dynasties so fascinating. We must walk carefully, balancing archaeology with tradition, science with story. But it is in this balance that we find the richness of their legacy. From villages to states. What turns a village into a state? Archaeologists point to several factors. Agriculture. Surpluses of millet and rice allowed populations to grow. Hierarchy. Some people gained more power, perhaps through ritual authority or control of resources. Warfare. Conflict between groups drove organization and defense. Religion. Leaders claimed divine favor or ancestral mandate. In the Yellow River Valley, all of these came together. The Neolithic cultures gave way to larger centers, more complex societies, and eventually dynasties. By around 2000 BCE, we see at Erlata, a site we will explore in Part 4, the beginnings of palatial structures, bronze workshops, and organized governance. Whether this was the Xia or not remains debated, but the transformation is unmistakable. The meaning of origins. Why do origins matter? For China, the Xia and Shang dynasties became the foundation of history itself. Later dynasties looked back to them for legitimacy, invoking their names as proof of continuity. The mandate of heaven, a concept developed by the Zhou, was retroactively applied to explain the fall of the Xia and Shang. To understand China is to understand how these early dynasties were remembered. Even if parts of their story are myth, they became the bedrock of identity, the first chapters of a history that stretches unbroken to the present. A civilization awakens. As we close this first part, picture the Yellow River Valley around 3000 BCE. Villages of thatched houses dot the plains. Farmers bend over millet fields. Potters turn wheels to shape black clay vessels. Children chase chickens through the dust. Beyond the village, the river gleams, wide and unpredictable, carrying life and death alike. From these simple beginnings, a great civilization would emerge. Its first dynasties, the Xia and Shang, would shape not only China's story but the world's. And though much is still mystery, their echoes remain, inviting us to listen, to imagine, to remember. Looking ahead. In the next part of our journey, we will step into legend. We will hear of you the Great, the hero who tamed the floods and founded the Xia. His story, half myth and half memory, captures the very heart of what it meant to live by the Yellow River, to wrestle with water, to shape chaos into order, to claim the right to rule. Every civilization has its founding hero. For Greece, it was Theseus and Heracles. For Mesopotamia, it was Gilgamesh. For China, it was you the Great, the men who tamed the floods, brought order to chaos, and founded the first dynasty, the Xia. Yu's story is not merely one of myth. It reflects the realities of life along the Yellow River, where water was both gift and curse. To the people of early China, floods were not occasional disasters but constant threats. Whole villages could be swept away, fields drowned, lives lost. To control water was to control life itself. And so, Yu's legend became the foundation of Chinese kingship. To rule was to tame nature, to bring balance between heaven and earth. Tonight, we follow Yu's journey. From the myth of the Great Flood, to his tireless labors, to his rise as king. We will see how his story reflects the struggle of the people, how it shaped the very idea of rulership in China, and how his memory endured for thousands of years. The Great Flood. The myth begins with a flood unlike any other. The rivers overflowed, drowning valleys and plains. Waters surged unchecked, carrying destruction across the land. This was not a single event but an age of flood, a world where chaos reigned. Ancient texts describe the flood as catastrophic, a disaster that seemed endless. In the classic of documents, Shujing, the waters reached to the heavens, covering mountains, sweeping away homes, leaving only islands of survival. To live in that world was to be constantly threatened, to never know when the river might rise again. Modern scholars see in this story the memory of real flooding events along the Yellow River. Sediment cores and geological studies reveal evidence of massive floods in northern China around the 3rd millennium BCE. Whether or not Yu himself lived, his story reflects this very real struggle of humanity against the river. Yu's father, Gun, and his failure. Before Yu, there was his father, Gun. The emperor at the time, sometimes said to be Yao, one of the legendary sage kings, tasked Gun with stopping the flood. Gun tried to build dams and dikes, blocking the waters. But his methods failed. The floods continued, even worse than before. In myth, Gun was punished for his failure. Some stories say he was executed, others that he transformed into an animal or spirit. His failure set the stage for his son Yu, who would succeed where he had not. The lesson was clear: brute force could not control the river. Something new was needed. Yu, the tireless worker. Yu took up his father's task. But instead of blocking the waters, he sought to guide them. He dug channels, dredged riverbeds, opened pathways for the water to flow safely to the sea. The legend says Yu worked without rest. For 13 years, he traveled the land, digging canals and inspecting rivers. He passed by his own home 3 times but never went inside, so dedicated was he to the task. His sacrifice became part of his myth, Yu, who put duty before family, who labored for the people above all else. This image of tireless devotion shaped the ideal of Chinese rulership. A true king was not one who lived for himself, but one who served the people, who ensured balance and safety. Yu's labor became the model of virtue. The animals and spirits. In some versions of the story, Yu was aided by animals and spirits. Tortoises and dragons helped him carry away the soil, divine beings guided his tools, birds pointed the way. These elements reflect the mythic nature of the tale, but they also hint at symbolic meanings. The tortoise, long-lived and stable, symbolized endurance. The dragon, associated with water, symbolized power and control over rivers. To say Yu worked with them was to say he harmonized with nature, that his success came not from domination but from cooperation. The division of the land. One of Yu's greatest achievements, according to tradition, was dividing the land into regions, each with its own rivers and boundaries. He organized the world into order, mapping it, naming it, and making it governable. This act of division was symbolic as well as practical. To create boundaries was to create civilization, to turn chaos into structure. Yu's map became the foundation for the Chinese view of their land as, all under heaven, a world ordered, ruled, and harmonized by the king. Yu as king. For his success, Yu was offered the throne. In some stories, Emperor Shun, successor to Yao, chose Yu as his heir. In others, the people themselves acclaimed him. What mattered was that Yu did not seize power by force. He earned it through virtue, through service, through his labor against the flood. Thus Yu became the first king of the Xia dynasty. His rule, according to tradition, established the pattern for dynasties to come. A king ruled not by birth alone, but by virtue. If he failed, if he became corrupt, cruel, or incompetent, the people had the right to replace him. This idea would later be codified as the mandate of heaven, one of the most enduring principles of Chinese political thought. The moral of Yu's story. Yu's legend is not simply about water. It is about the nature of leadership. His father Gun tried to block the river, to impose control from above, and failed. You succeeded by working with the river, guiding it, respecting its nature. The lesson is clear: a ruler must guide rather than force, must harmonize rather than dominate. In Yu's story, the flood is not only a natural disaster but a metaphor for society itself, chaotic, powerful, in need of guidance. The ruler is the one who brings order without destroying, who balances heaven, earth, and humanity. Archaeological reflections. Archaeologists have found evidence of massive floods in the Yellow River Basin around 1920 BCE, near the time when the Xia are said to have existed. One site at Jishur Gorge shows signs of a catastrophic flood that may have lasted for months. Could this be the flood of Yu? We cannot know for certain. But the legend may preserve memory of real events, passed down orally for generations before being recorded in texts. If so, Yu represents not only a mythic hero but also a cultural memory of survival and adaptation in the face of disaster. Yu's end and the Xia dynasty. Yu ruled with wisdom, but his death brought a turning point. Instead of passing the throne to a chosen sage, he passed it to his son. This marked the beginning of hereditary succession, the foundation of dynasties. The Xia thus became the first hereditary ruling house in Chinese tradition. From then on, kingship was not only about virtue but also about bloodline. This shift would shape Chinese politics for millennia, blending merit and lineage, virtue and inheritance. Yu's lasting legacy. For centuries, Yu was remembered as the model ruler. Temples were built in his honor, sacrifices offered, his story retold in poems and histories. The phrase, "to emulate Yu," became synonymous with virtuous rule. Even emperors thousands of years later invoked his name to legitimize their authority. Yu the Great became not just a man, but a symbol. A symbol of selflessness, of endurance, of harmony with nature, of kingship rooted in virtue. Whether or not he lived exactly as described, his memory shaped China's political philosophy in profound ways. Reflection. As we close tonight's tale, imagine Yu at work. The sun burns hot, the river roars. He digs channels with simple tools, his body worn, his clothes ragged. Yet he does not stop. He passes by his own home, hearing his child cry, but does not enter. The water must be tamed, the people must be safe. This image, more than any detail, is what endured. Yu is not remembered for comfort, but for sacrifice. Not for power, but for service. He is the great Yu, the tamer of floods, the founder of dynasties, the first great king of China. Looking ahead. In the next part of our journey, we will turn from Yu to the Xia dynasty itself. We will explore the legends of its kings, the debate over whether it truly existed, and the ways myth and archaeology intertwine in the search for China's first dynasty. When we speak of the Xia dynasty, we are walking on a boundary between myth and history. To later Chinese writers, the Xia were the beginning, the first dynasty, the foundation stone of Chinese civilization. To modern scholars, the Xia are more elusive, known only from later texts and from archaeological remains that may or may not be theirs. Were they a real dynasty, with kings, palaces, and armies? Or were they a story, created to explain the origins of the Shang and Zhou? The answer lies somewhere between memory and imagination. Tonight, we will wander through this twilight, through the texts that describe the Xia, the legends of their rulers, the archaeological debates, and the cultural significance of their place as the first link in China's dynastic chain. The Xia in ancient texts. The Xia dynasty was first described in the records of the grand historian, Shiji, by Sima Qian, writing in the 1st century BCE. According to him, the Xia began with Yu the Great, who was succeeded by his son Qi, and continued for 14 generations, ending with the tyrant Jie, overthrown by Tang, founder of the Shang. Other classical texts, such as the Bamboo Annals and the Book of Documents, Shujing, provide variations of the Xia story. Together, they portray a dynasty that lasted for centuries, ruled by a line of kings, and set the pattern for Chinese dynastic history: rise, glory, corruption, and fall. But here lies the puzzle. These accounts were written many centuries after the Xia were said to exist. No contemporary writings from the Xia themselves survive. We are left with tradition, not direct evidence. The line of kings. According to the traditional record, the Xia had 17 kings. Their names and deeds vary by source, but certain figures stand out. Yu the Great, the founder, famed for taming the floods. Qi, Yu's son, said to have established hereditary succession. Shao Kong, remembered for restoring the dynasty after a crisis, ruling with justice. Jie, the last king, infamous for cruelty and decadence. These kings were not just rulers, they were moral exemplars, positive or negative. The good kings embodied virtue and order, the bad kings embodied corruption and decline. In this way, the Xia story was as much moral lesson as history. The fall of the Xia. The end of the Xia dynasty, according to tradition, came with King Jie. He is described as a tyrant who cared more for pleasure than for his people. His favorite consort, Mo Shi, was said to delight in cruelty, convincing him to commit atrocities. Jie's excesses provoked rebellion. Tang of Shang, a nobleman of virtue, rose against him. The people turned to Tang, seeing him as the bearer of heaven's will. Jie was overthrown, and the Shang dynasty began. This tale established a pattern that would repeat through Chinese history: dynasties rise through virtue, decline through corruption, and fall through rebellion justified by heaven's mandate. Whether or not the Xia were real, their story became the model for all dynasties to come. Myth or history? So, were the Xia real? This is the great question. For centuries, Chinese historians accepted their existence without doubt. Only in the modern era, with archaeology and critical scholarship, has the question been raised. Skeptics argue that the Xia were a legendary invention, created by the Zhou to justify their own rule. By inventing a first dynasty, they could show a chain of succession, Xia to Shang to Zhou, making their conquest of the Shang seem part of a divine pattern. Supporters point to archaeological finds at Erlitou and other sites, which show evidence of a complex society around 1900 to 1500 BCE. They argue that this was the Xia, remembered in legend though not recorded in writing. The truth may be somewhere in between. The Xia may have been a real people, whose memory was preserved and reshaped into legend. Erlitou and the search for Xia. At the heart of the debate lies Erlitou, an archaeological site near the Yellow River. Discovered in the 20th century, Erlitou reveals palatial structures, bronze workshops, turquoise-inlaid ornaments, and evidence of centralized authority. It flourished around the same time the Xia are said to have existed. Some scholars identify Erlitou as the capital of the Xia. Others argue it was an early Shang center, or a separate culture altogether. Without written records, certainty is impossible. But Erlitou gives us the first glimpse of a society advanced enough to match the legends of the Xia. The role of the Xia in Chinese thought. Whether real or not, the Xia became central to how the Chinese understood their history. To later dynasties, they were the beginning, the proof that China's civilization stretched back in unbroken succession. To deny the Xia was to deny China's antiquity. Even today, the Xia carry cultural weight. They represent the idea that China has always been a continuous civilization, rooted in the earliest times. The debate over their existence is not just academic, it touches on identity, pride, and the meaning of history. Kings as archetypes. The Xia kings are remembered less for what they did than for what they symbolized. Yu represented virtue and labor. Jie represented tyranny and corruption. Together, they set the boundaries of kingship. This use of archetypal kings as moral lessons is common in early history. Like Gilgamesh in Mesopotamia or Romulus in Rome, the Xia kings blend myth and history, embodying values rather than facts. They tell us what ancient Chinese thought rulers should be, and should not be. The Xia as precedent. Later dynasties invoked the Xia as precedent. The Zhou, who overthrew the Shang, claimed that just as Tang had overthrown Jie, so too had they overthrown the corrupt Shang king. The cycle of rise and fall, justified by heaven's will, began with the Xia. In this sense, the Xia were not only the first dynasty, but the first link in a moral chain. A story that explained why dynasties fell and why new ones rose. Reflection. As we sit with the story of the Xia, we must hold two truths at once. On one hand, the Xia may not have existed as described. Their kings may be more myth than reality. On the other hand, their story mattered profoundly, shaping Chinese political thought for millennia. The Xia may be shadowy, but they are not empty. They are the mythic beginning of a civilization that has always sought continuity, always sought to explain the rise and fall of power. In the Xia, we see the blending of memory, morality, and identity. Closing image. Imagine a storyteller in the Zhou court, centuries after the Xia were said to have reigned. He speaks of you taming the floods, of Jie's cruelty, of Tang's rebellion. His audience nods, hearing not only a tale of the past but a mirror of the present. In his words, the Xia live again, not as a dynasty of stone, but as a dynasty of meaning. Looking ahead. In the next part of our journey, we will turn from texts to archaeology. We will explore the Erlitou culture in detail, the palaces, bronzes, and evidence that may connect myth to history. We will walk through the ruins that some call Xia, and others call something else, and see what they tell us about the dawn of Chinese civilization. If the Xia dynasty hovers between myth and memory, the Erlitou culture gives us something tangible. Clay, bronze, turquoise, and earth, remnants of a people who lived nearly 4,000 years ago. Whether Erlitou was the Xia, an early Shang, or a separate culture altogether remains debated, but what is certain is this: Erlitou was the first complex, palace-centered society we can see in the Yellow River Valley. In tonight's journey, we will walk through Erlitou's ruins. We will see its palaces, its workshops, its tombs, and its artifacts. We will ask what they tell us about life, power, and ritual at the dawn of Chinese civilization. And we will consider how Erlitou links the legends of Yu and Jie to the confirmed history of the Shang. The discovery of Erlitou. The story of Erlitou begins not in ancient times, but in the 20th century. In the 1950s, Chinese archaeologists excavating near the village of Erlitou in Hunan province uncovered pottery, bronze, and palace remains. Radiocarbon dating placed them around 1900 to 1500 BCE, the very window when the Xia were said to have reigned. Since then, Erlitou has become one of the most studied archaeological sites in China. Layers of occupation reveal a society growing from small villages into a powerful center, with palaces, workshops, and elite tombs. For many, this was the Xia brought to life. For others, it was the seed of the Shang. The layout of a city. Walking through Erlitou in imagination, you would see a city spread over several square kilometers. At its height, it covered nearly 300 hectares, vast for its time. Roads crisscrossed the site, dividing it into sections. At the center stood palatial compounds, raised on rammed earth foundations. These palaces were not as grand as later Shang structures, but they marked a clear break from the village life of the Neolithic. Here, rulers lived and governed. The very act of building such palaces required organized labor and centralized authority. This was no longer a chiefdom. It was a state. Palatial compounds. Archaeologists have identified at least 4 large palatial complexes at Erlitou. Their remains, foundations, courtyards, rammed earth floors, suggest halls for ritual, administration, and residence. Some were rebuilt and expanded over generations, reflecting continuity of rule. These palaces are the strongest evidence that Erlitou was the political center of a dynasty. They were not defensive fortresses but administrative and ritual spaces. Like the later Shang, power here was expressed through control of ritual, production, and ancestors, not through sheer walls. Bronze and the dawn of technology. Erlitou is famous for its bronze workshops, the earliest known large-scale bronze production in China. Archaeologists uncovered foundries with molds, crucibles, and slag, showing advanced casting techniques. The bronzes themselves were small and delicate, ritual vessels, weapons, ornaments. One striking find is a turquoise-inlaid bronze plaque, shimmering with geometric design. These objects were symbols of power, linking rulers to ritual authority. Bronze was not just a material, it was a technology of control. To mine, smelt, and cast required organization, labor, and specialized knowledge. Rulers who controlled bronze controlled ritual and warfare alike. Erlitou shows us the birth of this technology in China. turquoise and jade. Alongside bronze, Erlita yielded treasures of turquoise and jade. Ornaments carved from these materials were placed in tombs of the elite. A turquoise dragon-shaped ornament remains one of the site's most famous finds, perhaps echoing the mythical creatures later central to Chinese culture. Jade, revered since the Neolithic, continued as a symbol of purity and status. At Erlita, jade axes and ornaments show continuity with Longshan culture, linking past to present. These materials were not everyday objects, they marked hierarchy, wealth, and spiritual significance. Social hierarchy. The burials at Erlita reveal social divisions. Some graves contain jade, turquoise, and bronzes, while others are plain, with only pottery. This suggests a stratified society, with elites enjoying wealth and commoners left with little. At the top stood rulers in palaces, commanding labor, conducting rituals, and controlling bronze. Below them were artisans, farmers, and laborers, whose work sustained the center. Erlita shows the emergence of class distinction, the foundation of dynastic rule. Ritual and ancestors. Though we lack written records from Erlita, archaeology hints at ritual practices. Bronze vessels, likely used for offerings of food and drink, point to ceremonies honoring ancestors and gods. Burials with ornaments suggest belief in an afterlife where status endured. This emphasis on ritual fits with later Shang practices, where kings acted as mediators between the living and the ancestors. Erlita may represent the beginning of this worldview, where political power was inseparable from spiritual authority. Was Erlita the Xia? Here lies the great debate. Was Erlita the archaeological remains of the Xia dynasty? Or was it simply a culture predating the Shang, later folded into legend? Yes, it was the Xia. The timing aligns with traditional accounts. The palaces and bronzes show the kind of centralized society described in texts. Erlita fits the image of a first dynasty. No, it was not the Xia. The absence of written evidence makes certainty impossible. The Xia may have been entirely mythical, with Erlita actually belonging to the early Shang. A third view, Erlita may have been remembered in oral tradition, reshaped into the story of the Xia. The legend of Yu and his descendants may reflect real memories of Erlita rulers, transformed by time. Whatever the case, Erlita bridges the gap between Neolithic villages and the literate, bronze-wielding Shang. It is the missing link in China's early history. The human story. Imagine life in Erlita. Farmers plant millet in the fertile lush soil. Bronze workers tend furnaces, pouring molten metal into clay molds. Children play near courtyards, while priests or rulers conduct rituals in palatial halls. At night, the glow of fires rises from workshops, illuminating the growing city. This was not myth. These were real people, with lives, families, and hopes. Though their names are lost, their world remains in the earth they left behind. Continuity into the Shang. Erlita declined around 1500 BCE, just as the Shang rose to prominence. Some see this as transition, Erlita rulers giving way to Shang kings. Others see conquest. Either way, Erlita's culture did not vanish. Its bronze technology, palatial traditions, and ritual practices flowed directly into the Shang, shaping the first fully historical dynasty of China. Reflection. Erlita reminds us that myth often rests on foundations of truth. The Xia may or may not have existed exactly as described, but Erlita shows us that something real was there, a society advanced, organized, and powerful enough to leave a mark on memory. To call Erlita the Xia is both tempting and uncertain. But to study it is to glimpse the dawn of Chinese civilization, the threshold where legend steps into archaeology. Looking ahead. In the next part of our journey, we will look more closely at life in early Xia society, or at least, the society that legends and archaeology together suggest. How did they farm, trade, worship, and live? What rhythms of daily life shaped the people of the Yellow River Valley before the Shang? When we think of dynasties, we often think of kings, palaces, and battles. But beneath the rulers and their rituals lived the majority of the people, farmers, craftsmen, families, children, whose daily lives made civilization possible. The Xia dynasty, whether remembered in legend or glimpsed in the archaeological remains of Erlita, was not only a dynasty of rulers but of ordinary lives. Tonight, we step into that world. We walk through the millet fields, into the courtyards of villages, past the bronze workshops and burial grounds. We listen to the rhythms of farming, cooking, weaving, and worship. The Xia may be shrouded in debate, but their people lived in patterns we can imagine and reconstruct, bringing humanity to the shadow of a dynasty. The land and its rhythm. The Xia world was shaped by the Yellow River Valley, a land of fertile lush soil, dramatic floods, and shifting climates. Farming here required vigilance. Too little rain, and crops failed. Too much rain, and the river overflowed, drowning fields and homes. Yet when balanced, the land was generous. The people grew millet, a hardy grain suited to the dry conditions of northern China. Over time, rice cultivation also spread from the south, though millet remained the staple. With millet came beer, fermented grain drinks used in ritual and daily life. Seasons dictated everything. Spring for planting, summer for tending, autumn for harvest, winter for storage and ritual. The calendar of the Xia was not marked by king's decrees alone but by the turning of earth and sky. Farming and food. Farmers of the Xia era worked with stone and early bronze tools, hoes, sickles, and spades. Fields were likely small, divided among families, but collectively contributing to the larger community. Irrigation was crucial. Canals and dikes, remembered in the story of Yu the Great, helped channel water, preventing disaster and ensuring fertility. Their diet was simple but sustaining. Millet porridge and bread formed the base. Pork and chicken provided occasional meat. Fish from rivers and wild game supplemented the diet. Beans and vegetables, cabbage, roots, greens, were grown near homes. Beer brewed from millet was a common drink, used both in daily meals and in rituals. Meals were cooked in pottery vessels over open fires. Food was shared within extended families, reinforcing bonds of kinship. Homes and villages. Excavations at Erlita and similar sites reveal houses of rammed earth foundations and wooden posts, often rectangular in shape, with thatched roofs. Floors were sometimes sunken slightly, offering insulation. Villages ranged from small hamlets to larger towns clustered near palatial centers. At Erlita, artisans lived near workshops, while elites occupied palatial compounds. The division of space reflected social hierarchy. Inside the homes, daily life unfolded. Clay pots stored grain. Simple tools hung from walls. Looms or spindles spun thread from hemp. Hearths glowed with cooking fires. The village was the unit of life, but it was also tied into larger networks of power, tribute, and ritual. Clothing and appearance. Clothing was made from hemp and possibly silk, though silk was rare and reserved for elites. Hemp provided coarse but durable fabric, woven into tunics, skirts, and sashes. Leather shoes or sandals protected feet. For adornment, jade and turquoise were prized. Simple beads might be worn by commoners, while elites had elaborate ornaments. Hairstyles varied, with men tying hair into topknots and women braiding or pinning theirs. Appearance was not only practical but symbolic. To wear jade was to signal status, to dress in silk was to claim distinction. Even in daily life, the body was a canvas of social meaning. Artisans and craft. The Xia world was not only agricultural. It was also a world of artisans, whose skills created the bronzes, jades, and pottery that defined the era. Bronze workers labored in workshops, casting ritual vessels and weapons. Their furnaces glowed, their molds shaped with precision. Bronze was still rare, reserved for elites, but its symbolism was immense. Potters crafted vessels for storage, cooking, and ritual. Painted designs gave beauty to the practical. Jade carvers shaped ornaments of spiritual significance, believed to connect the living with ancestors. Weavers and spinners produced textiles from hemp, feeding both daily needs and ritual offerings. Craft was not only economic but sacred. To create a bronze ding vessel or a jade axe was to participate in the rituals of power, where material objects became bridges between worlds. Ritual and ancestors. Daily life was permeated by ritual. Offerings of food and drink were made to ancestors, whose presence shaped fortune and fate. The family was both biological and spiritual, linking the living with the dead. At community level, larger rituals likely took place in palatial or temple areas. Bronze vessels held food and wine for offerings, animals were sacrificed, and perhaps even humans in times of great need. These rituals were not occasional, they were the glue that held society together, legitimizing rulers and binding families. For the common farmer, pouring a libation to ancestors before planting or offering grain after harvest was part of life's rhythm. The line between daily work and sacred ritual was thin. Social hierarchy. Life in Xia society was not equal. At the top were kings and elites, who lived in palatial compounds, commanded labor, and controlled bronze. They were the ones whose names entered legend: Yu, Qi, Shao Kong. Below them were nobles and ritual specialists, who oversaw ceremonies and managed tribute. Then came artisans, skilled but not ruling, whose labor created the objects of prestige. At the base were farmers, the majority, who sustained the whole. Burial practices reveal this hierarchy clearly. Elite tombs at Erlata contained jade, turquoise, and bronzes, while common burials were plain. Even in death, status remained. Music and leisure. Though survival was central, the Xia world also had music and joy. Bones and pottery flutes have been found in Neolithic and Bronze Age contexts, suggesting music was part of ritual and daily life. Drums, bells, and string instruments may also have existed in early forms. Leisure likely included games with stones or bones, storytelling, and festivals. Ritual festivals, marking harvests or New Year's, blended leisure with sacred duty, offering both entertainment and renewal of bonds. Children and family. Families were large, extended across generations. Children worked early, helping in fields, tending animals, carrying water. Yet they also played, learned, and absorbed the traditions of ancestors. Marriage linked families, creating alliances within villages. Women were central to domestic work, weaving, cooking, and child-rearing, though elite women may have had ritual roles. The story of Fu Hao in the Shang dynasty shows that women could hold power, perhaps hints of this existed even in Xia times. The family was the foundation of society. To honor ancestors, to teach children, to marry wisely, these were as important as the work of kings. The landscape of belief. Though we cannot know their full pantheon, the Xia likely worshipped a mixture of ancestor spirits and nature powers. The river, the mountains, the sky, all were alive with force. Yu's story itself is evidence of this worldview, the ruler as mediator between humans and natural chaos. Offerings of grain, beer, and meat would have been made at shrines or altars. Fire and water were sacred, embodying both destruction and renewal. Ritual specialists may have guided these practices, shaping belief into organized religion. The wider world. The Xia did not live in isolation. They traded with neighboring cultures, exchanging jade, bronze, and pottery. Conflicts likely arose with rival clans, requiring warfare and defense. Chariots had not yet arrived, but infantry armed with stone and early bronze weapons would have fought. Warfare was small-scale compared to later times, but significant enough to drive hierarchy and consolidation of power. Through trade, warfare, and ritual, the Xia world expanded beyond villages into networks of influence, laying the groundwork for dynasties to come. A day in Xia society. Imagine dawn in a Xia village. Smoke rises from hearths as women prepare millet porridge. Men gather tools for the fields. Children chase chickens, laughing. By mid-morning, farmers bend in fields, planting or harvesting. Artisans in workshops mold clay or tend bronze furnaces. The air is filled with sounds of labor, the ring of tools, the crackle of fire. At midday, families gather for simple meals, then return to work. In the evening, as the sun sets, libations are poured to ancestors, Drums may sound in ritual, and families sit together, telling stories of you the great and the floods. This rhythm, repeated day after day, was the heartbeat of Xia society. Kings may have ruled, but it was farmers and artisans who carried civilization on their shoulders. Reflection. The Xia, whether fully real or half-legend, remind us that civilization is not only palaces and rulers. It is the daily life of ordinary people, the farmers, potters, smiths, and families who lived, worked, and believed in a world shaped by rivers and ancestors. Their lives were simple, yet they laid the foundation for millennia of Chinese culture. The rituals they practiced, the crops they planted, the ancestors they honored, all continued into Shang, Zhou, and beyond. In their daily rhythms, we hear the first heartbeat of a civilization that would endure for thousands of years. Looking ahead. In the next part of our journey, we will turn to the theme of warfare and power in the Xia. How did rulers enforce authority? What weapons did they wield, and what enemies did they face? We will explore how conflict shaped the early dynasties, and how warfare blended with ritual to define kingship. Every dynasty, whether remembered in glory or shadow, must reckon with power. Power is never only a matter of palaces and rituals, it must also be defended, projected, and sometimes seized by force. The Xia dynasty, like all early states, lived in a world of rival clans, shifting alliances, and contested lands. Warfare was a fact of life. Yet war in the Xia was not simply about violence. It was wrapped in ritual, infused with meaning, and tied deeply to kingship. Tonight, we enter the world of Xia warfare. We explore the weapons and tactics of their age, the role of conflict in shaping hierarchy, the ways battles were remembered in legend, and the relationship between war and ritual sacrifice. In doing so, we see how power was both maintained and justified in China's earliest dynasty. The context of early warfare. To understand Xia warfare, we must begin with the environment. The Yellow River Valley was fertile but contested. Clans and villages vied for control of land, water, and resources. Floods and droughts could push groups into conflict as survival grew uncertain. This was not yet the age of great empires with standing armies. Warfare in the Xia era was local, often clan against clan, village against village. Yet as political authority grew centralized, these conflicts became organized under kings. To fight was not merely to defend one's fields, it was to expand the domain of the dynasty, to secure tribute, to establish legitimacy. Weapons of the Xia. Archaeology provides us with glimpses of Xia-era weaponry, much of it found at Erlita and related sites. Stone tools, axes, knives, and arrowheads continued from Neolithic traditions. Though simple, they were deadly. Bronze weapons, early bronze spearheads, knives, and blades, dagger axes, have been found at Erlita. These were more durable and sharper than stone, though still rare and reserved for elites. Wood and bamboo. Spears and bows with stone or bronze tips were common, crafted from abundant materials. The most distinctive weapon was the dagger axe, mounted on a wooden shaft. It could slash or stab, making it versatile in combat. Later dynasties would use the ge as a symbol of authority, but in Xia times it was already a mark of warrior power. Warfare as ritual. In early Chinese society, war was not simply pragmatic, it was sacred. Battles were framed as struggles between order and chaos, between the dynasty and its rivals. Victories were not just military but cosmic, proof that the ruler held heaven's favor. Sacrifice often followed battle. Captives might be killed in rituals to honor ancestors or gods. Weapons were buried in pits as offerings. The line between war and worship was thin, for both affirmed the ruler's mandate. This intertwining of violence and ritual gave warfare a special weight. It was not random violence but part of the order of the world, legitimizing kingship and reinforcing hierarchy. Kings as warriors. In Xia legends, kings were not distant rulers but warrior leaders. Yu the Great, though remembered more for flood control, embodied strength and endurance. Later kings, like Shao Kang, were remembered for restoring the dynasty through battle after near collapse. The king's role was to lead armies, secure victories, and protect the people. To fail in battle was to fail as a ruler. Just as kings mediated between the living and ancestors in ritual, they mediated between order and chaos in war. Fortifications and defense. At Erlito, no massive walls like those of later Shang cities have been found. This suggests that warfare in the Xia era may have been smaller in scale, relying on open battle and raiding rather than sieges. Still, some settlements from the Longshan culture before Erlito show rammed earth walls, hinting that fortification was part of the toolkit when needed. Villages likely had simple defenses, ditches, palisades, raised platforms. The palace compounds at Erlito may have been centers not only of ritual but also of protection, where elites gathered strength against rivals. Rebellion and dynastic crisis. Conflict was not only external. Legends of the Xia speak of internal rebellion, succession disputes, and dynastic crises. The most famous is the near collapse of the Xia before Shao Kang, who restored the dynasty through military victory. This pattern, internal strife followed by restoration through war, would echo in later dynasties. War was not merely a danger but also a means of renewal, a way for virtuous leaders to prove their right to rule. The tyranny of Jie. The fall of the Xia, according to tradition, came through the corruption of its last king, Jie. Jie is described as cruel, arrogant, and given to excess. He neglected his people, indulged in pleasure, and punished dissent harshly. His tyranny led to rebellion. Tang of Shang, a leader of virtue, rallied forces and defeated Jie in battle. This war, remembered as the conquest of Xia, was more than political, it was framed as moral. Jie's loss proved that he had lost heaven's mandate. Tang's victory proved he was chosen to rule. In this story, war was not only the end of a dynasty but the revelation of divine justice. Warriors and society. Who fought in Xia battles? Likely, common farmers formed the bulk of the warriors, called upon in times of need. Armed with spears, bows, and axes, they fought seasonally, returning to fields when the campaign was done. Elites, however, carried bronze weapons and led troops. Their role in warfare reinforced their status, marking them as both military and ritual leaders. Success in battle justified their privilege, failure could cost them power. Thus warfare reinforced hierarchy, binding farmers to elites and elites to kings. The sounds of battle. To imagine a Xia battle is to imagine noise and confusion. Spears clash, arrows whistle, drums beat to signal troops. Leaders shout orders while warriors surge forward. Dust rises from the earth, mixing with the cries of men. But alongside the chaos, there is also order. Ritual banners may fly, sacrifices may precede battle, invocations may be spoken. The clash is not random, it is framed as the will of heaven playing out on earth. The cycle of power. The Xia story, as preserved in legend, presents a clear cycle. Kings rise through virtue, defend their people in war, and secure heaven's favor. But when kings grow corrupt, neglect defense, and indulge in cruelty, they lose power. Rebellion follows, justified by the claim that heaven has withdrawn its mandate. This cycle, first told of Xia and Shang, became the template for Chinese dynastic history. Warfare was the mechanism of transition, the way heaven reshaped the order of rule. Archaeological glimpses. At Erlito, weapons of bronze and stone have been uncovered. Though no written records describe their battles, these artifacts remind us that warfare was real, not only legendary. The presence of weapons in elite tombs suggests that martial power was part of rulership's identity. The absence of massive fortifications may mean conflict was more fluid, clan-based, or ritualized than in later periods. Yet the tools of war are undeniable, showing that violence accompanied the rise of statehood. Reflection. In Xia society, warfare was never only about fighting. It was about legitimacy, hierarchy, and the cosmic order. Kings fought not only to expand land but to prove their virtue. Victories were signs of heaven's blessing, defeats were warnings of decline. Through battle, rulers secured authority. Through rebellion, dynasties fell. In the Xia, we see the first outlines of a pattern that would repeat for 3,000 years, the intertwining of war, power, and heaven's will. Closing image. Imagine a Xia king before battle. He stands with bronze dagger axe in hand, banners fluttering behind him. Farmers turned soldiers wait at his side, bows and spears ready. Priests chant to ancestors, fires crackle in sacrifice. The king raises his weapon, not just as a blade of war but as a symbol of order. When the battle begins, dust and chaos rise, but to the people watching, this is not merely combat. It is the fate of the dynasty being decided, the will of heaven revealed in blood and dust. Looking ahead. In the next part of our journey, we will turn from battlefields to ritual and religion in the Xia dynasty. How did the people worship? What gods or ancestors did they honor? How did kings use ritual to maintain authority? Through ritual, we will see how power was sanctified, and how belief bound the dynasty together. If warfare was the outer expression of power in the Xia dynasty, ritual was its inner heart. Kings fought battles, but they also presided over ceremonies. They wielded weapons, but they also lifted vessels of wine to the heavens and to the ancestors. For the Xia, as for later dynasties, political authority was inseparable from the sacred. To rule was to mediate between the human and the divine. Tonight, we step into the ritual life of the Xia world. We will explore the worship of ancestors and spirits, the role of kings as high priests, the objects of bronze and jade that embodied sacred power, and the ways in which ritual knit society together. In doing so, we glimpse not only the religion of a dynasty but the birth of traditions that would endure in Chinese civilization for millennia. The worldview of the Xia. The Xia people lived in a world alive with spirits. The river, the mountains, the sky, the ancestors, all possessed power. Misfortune was never random but the result of imbalance or neglect. To ensure harmony, offerings had to be made, ceremonies performed, order maintained. This worldview was not unique to the Xia, it stretched back to the Neolithic cultures of Yangshao and Longshan. But under the Xia, it became systematized, bound into kingship. The king was not merely a political leader, he was the pivot of ritual, the one who mediated between humanity and the cosmos. Ancestor worship. At the center of Xia religion was ancestor worship. The dead were not gone but present, influencing the fortunes of the living. To honor them was to ensure prosperity, to neglect them was to invite disaster. Offerings of food, drink, and sometimes animals were made to ancestors at household shrines. Elite families likely held larger ceremonies, using bronze vessels for libations of millet wine. In death, elites were buried with jade ornaments and bronze symbols of status, ensuring their continued power in the spirit world. This continuity between living and dead reinforced family bonds. Each generation was linked to the next, creating an unbroken chain stretching back into myth. Nature and spirit powers. Beyond ancestors, the Xia also revered natural powers. The Yellow River itself was a sacred force, dangerous and life-giving. Mountains, storms, fire, and sky were all alive with spiritual energy. Legends of Yu the Great, who tamed the flood, reveal this worldview. Yu's labor was not only practical but sacred, an act of harmonizing with nature's spirits. His success made him king, proof that he had balanced human society with the forces of the cosmos. Kings as ritual leaders. The Xia kings, like later Shang rulers, likely presided over the most important rituals. They offered to ancestors, invoked blessings, and interpreted omens. Their role was priestly as much as political. This gave their power legitimacy. A king was not just stronger or wealthier than others, he was the chosen mediator, the one able to speak to spirits and secure heaven's favor. Warfare might win territory, but ritual secured the right to rule. In this sense, kingship in the Xia was inseparable from religion. Without ritual, there was no dynasty. The role of bronze. Bronze played a sacred role in ritual. At Erlito, archaeologists have found small bronze vessels and ornaments, some inlaid with turquoise. These were not practical tools but ceremonial objects, used in offerings of food and drink. Later Shang bronzes would become massive and ornate, inscribed with symbols and names. But the Xia era bronzes already carried meaning. To own and use bronze was to possess sacred authority. The ruler who controlled bronze controlled ritual, and thus controlled the bond between humans and spirits. Jade and turquoise. Alongside bronze, jade remained central to ritual life. Jade was seen as pure, enduring, and spiritually potent. In burials, jade axes, beads, and ornaments linked the dead to the spirit world. At Erlita, turquoise ornaments shaped into dragon-like forms suggest symbolic power. Dragons, later associated with water and heaven, may already have held spiritual meaning. To wear or bury such objects was to call upon forces beyond the human realm. Sacrifice. Sacrifice was a key element of Xia ritual. Offerings of grain, wine, and animals were common. Some scholars believe human sacrifice may also have occurred, based on later Shang practices and hints in burial remains. Sacrifice was not simply giving up something valuable, it was communication. By offering food or life, humans spoke to spirits, secured blessings, and maintained harmony. Without sacrifice, the balance between worlds might falter. Festivals and ritual calendar. Though we lack direct records, the Xia likely followed seasonal festivals tied to agriculture. Planting and harvest would have been accompanied by offerings, ensuring fertility and abundance. The turning of the year may have been marked by renewal rituals, perhaps involving fire, water, or ancestor feasts. Drums, flutes, and chants would have filled these ceremonies, blending music with devotion. Ritual was not a rare event but a rhythm of life, woven into the agricultural cycle. Divination and omens. While oracle bone inscriptions belong firmly to the Shang, the roots of divination likely stretched into Xia times. Shamans or ritual specialists may have interpreted cracks in bones or shells, the flight of birds, or patterns in fire and water. Omens guided decisions about planting, war, and sacrifice. The king, as high priest, may have been the ultimate interpreter of heaven's will, giving divine sanction to human choices. Ritual and social order. Ritual was not only religious, it was political. By leading ceremonies, kings reinforced hierarchy. Elites gathered in palaces to share wine from bronze vessels, commoners watched or participated in festivals, all bound into a structure that placed the king at the center. Ritual was also moral. The story of Jie, the last Xia king, condemns him not only for cruelty but for neglect of ritual. His excesses and impiety symbolized disorder. In contrast, Tang of Shang was remembered for piety, his victory justified as heaven's will. Thus ritual was not optional, it was the measure of kingship itself. Archaeological glimpses. At Erlita, the remains of ritual are subtle but telling. Bronze vessels, jade ornaments, and burial goods all point to ceremonies of offering and remembrance. Palatial compounds with large courtyards may have hosted communal rituals. Though the written prayers of the Xia are lost to time, the objects they left behind whisper of their devotion. Each vessel poured with wine, each jade placed in a tomb, was part of a dialogue between humans and spirits. Reflection. Ritual in the Xia dynasty was not a separate sphere of life. It was life itself, woven into farming, warfare, family, and kingship. To plant millet was to offer to ancestors. To fight a battle was to fulfill heaven's will. To rule was to mediate between worlds. Though the Xia remain half-legend, the rituals attributed to them became the foundation of Chinese civilization. Ancestor worship, ritual bronze, king as priest, these threads began in the mists of Xia and endured for thousands of years. Closing image. Imagine a Xia ritual. The king stands in a courtyard, bronze vessel in hand. Priests chant, drums beat, the smell of millet wine fills the air. The people watch as he pours libation to the ancestors, steam rising toward the heavens. In that moment, the dynasty is not only political but cosmic. The living, the dead, and the divine are bound together in harmony, held by ritual's power. Looking ahead. In the next part of our journey, we will turn to the legends of Xia's kings, beyond Yu and Jie. Figures like Qi and Shao Kang appear in tradition, remembered for founding succession or restoring order. Through their stories, we see how memory shaped the image of the dynasty's rulers, blending fact and morality. The Xia dynasty, as remembered in later texts, was not only the story of Yu the Great and Jie the Tyrant. Between them lay a line of kings, figures who ruled, faltered, restored, or decayed. Their names are preserved in ancient annals like the Bamboo Annals and the records of the Grand Historian, though their deeds blur between legend and morality tale. These kings were not remembered as ordinary rulers. Each became a symbol of virtue or failure, continuity or collapse, service or indulgence. Tonight, we walk through this line of kings, from Yu Sun Qi to the dynasty's restorers, to the tragic reign of Jie. In their stories, we see the contours of Chinese political philosophy taking shape, the conviction that virtue sustains dynasties, while corruption destroys them. From Yu to Qi, the birth of succession. Yu the Great, after taming the floods, founded the Xia dynasty. But his greatest legacy, according to tradition, was not only his flood control or his kingship, it was his decision to pass rule to his son, Qi, rather than to a chosen worthy. This marked the first hereditary succession in Chinese history, according to legend. Before Yu, sage kings like Yao and Shun had chosen successors based on merit. Yu's choice of Qi represented a turning point, where kingship became dynasty. From then on, rule was passed by bloodline, not solely by virtue. Qi himself is remembered as strong and able. He quelled rebellions that arose after Yu's death, establishing his authority. His reign set the tone for Xia. Kingship was inherited, but it had to be maintained by force and legitimacy. The Middle Kings. After Qi, the Xia line continues with rulers whose names are preserved but whose deeds are shadowed. Among them, Tai Kang, Qi's son, remembered as indulgent and negligent. He lost the support of the people and was driven into exile. His failings illustrate the dangers of kings who neglect duty. Shao Kang, perhaps the most famous of the Middle Kings, Shao Kang restored the Xia after a time of chaos. He rallied forces, defeated rivals, and re-established the dynasty's strength. His reign is remembered as a return to order, proof that dynasties could be renewed through virtue. Zhou and Huai, kings mentioned in later lists, whose reigns blend into the sequence without strong stories, but who represent the continuity of Xia's lineage. The pattern of rise, fall, and restoration already emerges here. Kings fail, dynasties wobble, but a virtuous ruler restores balance, until corruption returns again. Shao Kang's restoration. The story of Shao Kang deserves special attention. After Tai Kang's failures, the dynasty fell into disarray, with rival clans seizing power. But Shao Kang, a descendant of Yu, gathered support, led military campaigns, and reclaimed the throne. His reign became legendary as a period of renewal. Agriculture flourished, rituals were restored, and the dynasty regained stability. For later thinkers, Shao Kang embodied the possibility of restoration, that dynasties might falter but need not collapse if virtue returned. In this, Shao Kang became a model for later rulers who sought to revive their states after decline. His story shows the enduring Chinese theme of cycles, decline followed by renewal, all part of heaven's pattern. The later kings. The kings who followed Shao Kang carried the dynasty toward its eventual end. Some were remembered as competent, others as weak. Their names, Mang, Xie, Bujiang, Jiong, Jin, Kong Jia, are listed in the annals, each contributing to the dynasty's long but uneven course. A few are associated with omens or strange tales. For example, Kong Jia is remembered as superstitious, fascinated by spirits and omens, indulging in rituals that strayed from proper order. His reign suggests the theme of rulers losing balance, distracted from governance by excess or obsession. These kings remind us that the Xia, whether real or remembered, were imagined as a dynasty like any other, marked by capable rulers, flawed rulers, and the inevitable slide toward corruption. Jie, the tyrant king. At the end of the Xia stands Jie, the archetype of tyranny. Later texts describe him as cruel, arrogant, and decadent. He ignored his people, indulged in luxury, and inflicted harsh punishments. His consort, Mo Shi, is portrayed as equally corrupt, delighting in cruelty. Stories of Jie include excesses so extreme they read as moral allegories. One tale says he built a lake of wine, with islands of meat, where thousands partied while the people starved. Another says he punished dissenters with brutal tortures, silencing opposition through fear. Whether these stories are historical or not, they serve a purpose. Jie became the symbol of the dynasty's decay, the proof that corruption invites downfall. Tang of Shang and the fall. Against Jie rose Tang of Shang, a noble leader remembered for his virtue. Tang gathered allies, won battles, and overthrew Jie, founding the Shang dynasty. Tang's victory was framed not merely as rebellion but as moral necessity. Heaven, it was said, had withdrawn its mandate from Jie and bestowed it upon Tang. Thus the fall of Xia was not random but divinely ordained, a fulfillment of the cycle that began with you. In this way, the Xia story established the mandate of heaven long before it was named, a principle that would dominate Chinese political thought for centuries. Kings as archetypes. The kings of Xia are not remembered as detailed historical figures. They are remembered as archetypes. Yu, the virtuous founder, embodiment of service. Qi, the heir, marking the birth of hereditary rule. Tai Kong, the negligent king, symbol of decline. Shao Kong, the restorer, proof of renewal. Jie, the tyrant, whose corruption destroyed the dynasty. Through these archetypes, the Xia story becomes more than history, it becomes a moral cycle, teaching that virtue sustains, negligence threatens, and corruption destroys. The Xia in philosophy. Later philosophers used the Xia kings as examples. Confucius spoke of Yu's selflessness, urging rulers to emulate his tireless service. Mencius condemned Jie as the model of tyranny, arguing that rebellion against such rulers was justified. Thus the Xia kings lived on not only in annals but in political thought, shaping the ideals of governance. They became tools for teaching morality, their remembered reigns symbols of what to pursue or avoid. Archaeological shadows. Archaeology has yet to confirm the names or deeds of these kings. But Erlitou and related sites show evidence of centralized power, elite tombs, and palatial compounds. Whether or not Yu, Qi, or Shao Kong lived exactly as described, the society they represent was real, a world of rulers, rituals, and power struggles. In this way, the Xia kings may be seen as legendary faces placed upon historical realities, giving names and morals to processes of state formation and dynastic change. Reflection. The kings of Xia remind us that dynasties are not only political structures but stories. Through their remembered reigns, the Chinese crafted a narrative of rise, decline, and renewal. Virtue sustains, corruption destroys, heaven decides. Whether Yu, Qi, or Jie were real kings or moral symbols, their stories endure because they capture truths about leadership and human society. In them, the Xia become not just a dynasty of history but a dynasty of meaning. Closing image. Imagine the line of Xia kings as figures in a long procession. Yu, muddy and weary from his labors against the flood, hands his staff to Qi. Shao Kong rides at their center, rallying troops to restore the realm. At the end, Jie sits in decadent splendor, his wine lake glistening, unaware of Tang's armies approaching. This is the story of Xia's rulers, not a chronicle of dates, but a cycle of archetypes, carrying lessons for every age. Looking ahead. In the next part of our journey, we will turn to the material culture of Xia. What objects did they craft, use, and revere? How did pottery, bronze, jade, and daily tools shape their world? Through artifacts, we will see the tangible side of the dynasty, the things they left behind that speak to us across millennia. Every civilization leaves behind traces of itself. Not always in words or palaces that survive untouched, but in the simple objects of daily life, pots, tools, ornaments, weapons. The Xia dynasty, half hidden in legend, speaks to us most clearly through material culture. Excavations at Erlitou and other sites give us glimpses of what Xia people made, touched, used, and treasured. Tonight, we walk through this world of things. We pick up clay pots still stained by fire, hold jade polished smooth by patient hands, Watch bronze glow as molten metal is poured into molds. From humble cooking vessels to sacred ornaments, the Xia's material culture reveals their economy, their beliefs, their social order, and their artistry. In these objects, the shadows of their lives are made visible. The everyday tools of life. For the majority of Xia people, life revolved around farming. Tools were the foundation of survival. Stone tools, though bronze was emerging, stone remained widely used. Axes, hoes, knives, and sickles carved from polished stone were durable and affordable. Bone tools, needles, awls, and small implements made from animal bones filled domestic needs like sewing and weaving. Wood and bamboo, spears, digging sticks, and simple plows were crafted from abundant materials, though they rarely survive archaeologically. These tools may seem ordinary, but they were the heart of Xia society. Without them, fields could not be planted, clothes could not be sewn, homes could not be built. Pottery, the silent witness. Pottery was perhaps the most widespread material of the Xia. Clay vessels served for storage, cooking, and ritual. At Erlita, archaeologists have found pottery in many forms. Storage jars, large vessels for grain and liquids, sometimes plain, sometimes decorated. Tripod ding vessels, used for cooking and ritual, with 3 sturdy legs to stand over fire. Pouring vessels, elegant forms with spouts, designed for libations of wine in ritual. Painted pottery, though less elaborate than earlier Yangshao, some Xia pottery bore geometric patterns. Pottery bridges daily life and ritual. A pot might hold millet porridge one day, and the next, it might be filled with wine as an offering to ancestors. Its presence in tombs reminds us that the dead too needed vessels for the afterlife. Bronze, a new technology. The most striking feature of Xia material culture is the emergence of bronze metallurgy. Erlita is home to China's earliest large-scale bronze foundries. Archaeologists have uncovered furnaces, crucibles, molds, and slag, evidence of organized workshops producing bronzes for elite use. The objects themselves are delicate but powerful in meaning. Ritual vessels, small bronze cups and plaques, sometimes inlaid with turquoise. Weapons, dagger axes, spearheads, and knives, sharper and stronger than stone. Ornaments, bronze plaques with intricate designs, showing early artistry. Bronze was more than a material, it was power. To control bronze production was to control ritual and warfare. Kings who commanded bronze secured legitimacy, marking themselves as intermediaries between human and divine. Jade, the stone of heaven. Long before bronze, jade had been revered in China. By Xia times, jade remained central to ritual and status. At Erlita, jade axes, ornaments, and beads were found in elite burials. The stone, carved painstakingly with sand and cord, was valued for its translucence and endurance. To the Xia, jade symbolized purity and spiritual power. A famous Xia jade form was the yu, a ceremonial axe. Unlike practical axes, these were polished and unused, carried by rulers as symbols of authority. To hold jade was to hold a connection to heaven. Turquoise and ornaments. Turquoise ornaments, sometimes inlaid into bronze, appear in Erlita's material culture. One turquoise dragon-shaped piece is especially striking, suggesting early symbolic use of the dragon motif. Jewelry of turquoise and jade distinguished elites from commoners. To wear such ornaments was to display wealth, lineage, and spiritual connection. In a society where hierarchy was emerging, adornment became a language of power. Burial goods. The Xia belief in an afterlife is visible in their burials. Elite tombs contained pottery, jade, bronze, and ornaments. Common graves contained simpler vessels. The goods reflect both daily needs and ritual symbolism: food, drink, weapons, and ornaments for the journey beyond. Burial practices reveal inequality. Some individuals were laid to rest with wealth and splendor, others with little. This division mirrors the stratified society of Xia, where rulers and elites commanded resources that commoners could not. Workshops and production. The organization of production at Erlita speaks to a centralized authority. Bronze workshops were clustered near palatial areas, suggesting elite control. Artisans labored under the patronage of rulers, producing objects that reinforced kingship. This was not random craft but coordinated industry. Bronze, jade, and pottery were made not only for utility but to serve the ritual and political needs of the dynasty. Objects carried meaning as much as function. Symbolism in objects. Each material carried symbolic weight. Stone tools, connection to tradition and practicality. Pottery, bridge between daily life and ritual. Bronze, sacred power, elite control, and new technology. Jade, purity, heaven, spiritual endurance. Turquoise, ornament, beauty, and early dragon symbolism. Together, these objects formed a material language, communicating hierarchy, belief, and identity. The artistry of design. Though Xia objects are simpler than the ornate bronzes of the Shang, their artistry should not be underestimated. The smoothness of jade axes, the symmetry of bronze plaques, the balance of tripod pots, all reveal a people attentive to beauty as well as function. Design carried meaning. The tripod ding, with its 3 legs, symbolized stability. The dragon motif hinted at cosmic power. Even simple geometric patterns may have carried spiritual resonance. Continuity and legacy. The Xia's material culture did not vanish with their dynasty. It flowed into the Shang, where bronze became grander, jade more elaborate, and rituals more formalized. But the roots lie in Xia. Every Shang ding vessel, every Zhou jade ornament, carries echoes of Xia craftsmanship. The dynasty remembered as the first also laid the foundations of China's material traditions. A day in the workshop. Imagine a bronze workshop at Erlita. Fires roar in clay furnaces. Artisans, soot-streaked and weary, pour molten metal into clay molds. Sparks leap as bronze hardens into form. Nearby, jade carvers scrape stone with cord and sand, hour after hour, coaxing translucence into shape. In another corner, potters turn wheels, shaping vessels that will hold food, drink, or offerings. Each object, whether humble or precious, will enter the cycle of life and ritual, carrying meaning beyond its form. Reflection. The Xia are remembered in legend, but their world is revealed through things. Tools and pots speak of survival. Bronze and jade speak of power. Burial goods whisper of belief. Together, they form a material portrait of a society both ordinary and extraordinary. In these objects, we hear the voices of a people who lived 4,000 years ago. Their kings may be debated, but their pots, axes, and ornaments are real. They remind us that civilization is built not only by rulers but by artisans, farmers, and families, whose hands shape the material world. Closing image. Picture a Xia tomb, freshly sealed. Inside lies the body of an elite, adorned with jade and turquoise. At his side rest bronze vessels and pottery jars, filled with food and wine. Outside, mourners pour libations, calling on ancestors to receive him. In the quiet darkness, the objects wait, carrying their meanings across millennia, until they are uncovered by archaeologists, and their story is told again. Looking ahead. In the next part of our journey, we will shift focus to myth and morality in Xia storytelling. How were the tales of Xia kings shaped into lessons for later generations? How did Confucius and other thinkers use the Xia as examples of virtue and vice? Through story, we will see how the Xia lived on in philosophy long after their dynasty ended. The Xia dynasty, as we have seen, stands on the edge of history, half remembered in texts, half imagined in legend, and half glimpsed in archaeology. But perhaps their greatest legacy lies not in what they did during their time, but in how they were remembered afterward. For centuries, the Xia kings became moral examples in the writings of philosophers and historians. Their reigns were retold as stories of virtue or corruption, designed to teach later generations the principles of good governance. Tonight, we will explore how the Xia lived on in myth and morality. We will see how Yu the Great became a model of tireless service, how Jie became the archetype of tyranny, and how Confucian thinkers used these figures to shape political philosophy. In this way, the Xia did not merely disappear into obscurity, they became woven into the moral fabric of China's history. Yu the Great as a model of virtue. Yu's story, with its images of him passing by his own home 3 times without entering, became one of the most cherished tales in Chinese tradition. To later philosophers, this sacrifice was not just about taming floods, it was about putting the people before oneself. Confucian writings praised Yu for embodying Ren, or benevolence. He worked for the good of all, not his own comfort. His sweat, his sacrifice, his endless labor, these became ideals for rulers to emulate. A king, the text taught, should be like Yu, selfless, devoted, unwearied in his service to the people. This memory shaped the ideal of rulership. Even emperors thousands of years later invoked Yu's example to remind themselves, or to remind their subjects, that their duty was to labor tirelessly for the welfare of the realm. Jie as the archetype of tyranny. If he was the great model of virtue, Jie was his opposite. Stories of Jie are filled with cruelty, arrogance, and excess. His wine lakes and meat forests, his brutal punishments, his neglect of ritual, all painted a picture of a king who had abandoned virtue. For Confucian thinkers, Jie was the example of what happens when rulers put themselves before their people. His downfall was not just political, it was cosmic. He lost the support of heaven, and therefore of the people. His overthrow by Tang of Shang was remembered not as rebellion but as justice, heaven's mandate shifting from corruption to virtue. Thus Jie became the moral warning, no matter how powerful, a tyrant cannot endure. The cycle of virtue and vice. The Xia story, as retold in later philosophy, became the first illustration of a great cycle. Dynasties rise through virtue and fall through corruption. Yu's labor and Shao Kang's restoration represented the sustaining power of morality. Jie's cruelty represented the inevitable decay of neglect. This cycle was not only descriptive but prescriptive. It taught rulers that their survival depended on virtue. It taught subjects that resistance to tyranny was justified. And it gave historians a framework for interpreting all of Chinese history. The mandate of heaven. Though the phrase, mandate of heaven, was first articulated by the Zhou to justify their conquest of the Shang, its roots reach back to the Xia. The story of Jie losing heaven's favor and Tang receiving it is an early expression of this principle. Heaven, in this view, was not static. It did not support rulers unconditionally. Instead, it rewarded virtue and punished corruption. A king who ruled justly kept heaven's mandate. A tyrant lost it, and his dynasty fell. This idea, born in the telling of Xia's fall, became one of the most enduring principles of Chinese political philosophy. For over 2,000 years, dynasties rose and fell under its shadow. Confucius and the Xia. Confucius, writing in the 6th century BCE, looked back at the Xia as part of a lineage of wisdom. Though he knew their history only through tradition, he invoked Yu as an example of diligence and simplicity. For Confucius, Yu's greatness was not only in taming floods but in living modestly despite his power. He was said to have eaten simple food, worn plain clothes, and placed duty above luxury. Confucius pointed to this as the model for rulers, to live with humility, to serve with sincerity. At the same time, Confucius condemned rulers like Jie, whose indulgence destroyed their people. To him, the Xia's fall was a warning, an early lesson that kings must remain morally upright. Mencius and the justification of rebellion. The philosopher Mencius, a follower of Confucius writing in the 4th century BCE, took the moral lessons of Xia even further. He argued that overthrowing tyrants was not rebellion, it was justice. When asked about the downfall of Jie, Mencius declared that Tang of Shang did not murder a king, for Jie had already lost the essence of kingship by abandoning virtue. He was no longer truly a king but a tyrant, and removing him was righteousness. Through Mencius, the Xia story became more than a lesson for rulers, it became a political philosophy that justified the people's right to resist corruption. The Xia in Taoist thought. Taoist texts, though less focused on political morality, also remembered Yu. Some portrayed him less as a model of virtue and more as a figure who disrupted the natural order by laboring endlessly to control the floods. For Taoists, Yu's story illustrated the tension between human effort and natural flow. This reinterpretation shows how the Xia stories were flexible, used by different schools of thought to make different points. For Confucians, Yu was the model of selfless labor. For Taoists, he was a symbol of excessive interference. Xia is the beginning of history. By the time of Sima Qian, writing in the 1st century BCE, the Xia were firmly embedded as the first dynasty in the grand sweep of Chinese history. His records of the grand historian placed them at the start of the dynastic chain: Xia, Shang, Zhou. For Sima Qian, the Xia were important not only for what they did but for what they symbolized. They showed that history had a beginning, that China's civilization stretched back in unbroken succession. Their story anchored the continuity that defined China's self-understanding. The Xia is mirror for later dynasties. Throughout Chinese history, rulers invoked the Xia as a mirror. When emperors wished to praise themselves, they compared their virtue to Yu. When critics wished to condemn them, they compared their corruption to Jie. This use of history as mirror. Taking history as a mirror, one can know the rise and fall of states, became a hallmark of Chinese political culture. The Xia were the first and most enduring example in that mirror. Archaeology and memory. Even as modern archaeology debates the Xia's reality, their memory remains powerful. The Erlita culture provides evidence of a society that may have been the historical root of the Xia story. But even if the legends grew beyond the facts, the moral lessons they carried were no less influential. The Xia were not only about kings and palaces, they were about meaning. They taught that rulers serve the people, that tyranny invites downfall, that heaven's mandate shifts. These lessons outlived the dynasty, shaping centuries of thought. Reflection. In the end, the Xia may be less important for what they were and more important for what they meant. Their kings became archetypes, their dynasty became a lesson, their fall became a warning. Through Confucius, Mencius, and countless later thinkers, the Xia lived on as the moral foundation of Chinese history. They remind us that history is never only about what happened. It is about how people remember, interpret, and use the past to guide the present. In that sense, the Xia dynasty, myth or reality, remains as alive today as it was in the stories told thousands of years ago. Closing image. Imagine a philosopher in the Zhou court, speaking to a young ruler. He tells of Yu, who passed his home 3 times without entering, and of Jie, who drank from a lake of wine. He points to the ruler and says, "Be like Yu, not like Jie." In that moment, the Xia live again, not as history, but as morality, teaching lessons across the ages. Looking ahead. In the next part of our journey, we will shift focus to the transition from Xia to Shang. How did Tang of Shang rise to power? What battles, myths, and omens surrounded the fall of the Xia? Through this transition, we will move from the shadowy dynasty of legend to the first fully historical dynasty of China. Every dynasty has its twilight, and in Chinese tradition, none shines darker than the fall of the Xia. From the legendary labors of Yu the Great to the tyrannical excesses of Jie, the Xia story is framed as a cycle of virtue and corruption, of rise and decline. And in that decline, a new dynasty, the Shang, rose to take its place. Tonight, we step into this transition. We explore the stories of Jie's tyranny, the virtues of Tang of Shang, the battle that toppled one dynasty and established another, and the deeper meanings of this shift in China's earliest remembered history. Through this turning point, we move from the shadowy Xia to the more archaeologically attested Shang, and in doing so, we see how Chinese civilization began to define itself through cycles of moral rise and fall. Jie, the tyrant king. At the heart of Xia's downfall is the figure of King Jie, remembered in later texts as one of history's great villains. The bamboo annals, the records of the grand historian, and countless later writings paint him as cruel, arrogant, and self-indulgent. Jie is said to have ignored his people, punishing dissent harshly and rewarding only sycophants. He indulged in endless pleasure, constructing a lake of wine surrounded by forests of meat for decadent banquets. His consort, Mo Shi, was remembered as equally corrupt, delighting in cruelty and urging Jie to acts of excess. Though these tales may be moral exaggerations, their symbolism is clear. Jie represented the decay of virtue. Where you had labored tirelessly, Jie feasted lazily. Where earlier kings offered ritual to ancestors, Jie abandoned tradition for indulgence. the suffering of the people. The Xia's decline is also remembered as a time of suffering for the common people. Taxes grew heavier, labor demands harsher, punishments more brutal. Dissent was silenced, and famine or flood may have worsened conditions. Legends say that when Tang of Shang rose in rebellion, the people flocked to his side, seeing him as the bearer of justice. The moral lesson was unmistakable: when rulers neglect the people, they lose not only loyalty but the very mandate of heaven. Tang of Shang. Against Jie rose Tang, remembered as a man of virtue, wisdom, and restraint. Tang ruled a vassal state under the Xia but gradually gained strength and followers. He was described as generous to his people, fair in justice, and devoted in ritual. Texts say that Tang surrounded himself with wise advisors, who counseled patience, moderation, and preparation. Unlike Jie, who ignored heaven, Tang prayed and offered sacrifice, presenting himself as a man in tune with cosmic order. Tang's rise was not framed as ambition but as necessity. Heaven itself, the stories say, had withdrawn its favor from Jie and bestowed it upon Tang. The mandate of heaven in action. The fall of the Xia and the rise of the Shang became the classic example of the mandate of heaven in action. Though the Zhou would later formalize the concept, its seeds are found here. Heaven, in this view, does not grant power unconditionally. It demands virtue. When a ruler turns tyrant, heaven withdraws its mandate. Rebellion is no longer treason but justice. Tang's conquest of Xia was thus framed as heaven's will. This principle would echo through all later dynasties, making the Xia-Shang transition not just a political change but a philosophical precedent. The Battle of Muye. The decisive clash between Xia and Shang is remembered as the Battle of Muye. Sources differ in detail, but the broad strokes are dramatic. Jie marched his forces against Tang, confident in numbers and strength. Tang, though outnumbered, relied on the support of the people and the favor of heaven. As the armies faced each other, a great storm broke, with thunder, rain, and wind. To later writers, this was no coincidence but heaven itself striking against Jie. Jie's troops faltered, demoralized and disloyal. Tang's forces pressed the attack, and the Xia army collapsed. Jie fled, abandoning his kingdom, and Tang claimed victory. Though the details are legendary, the symbolism is powerful. Nature itself, heaven itself, sided with virtue against tyranny. Jie's end. After his defeat, Jie fled into exile. Some accounts say he died in the wilds, abandoned and bitter. Others say he lived out his days in obscurity, lamenting his downfall. His fate became part of the moral lesson. The once mighty tyrant, who built lakes of wine and forests of meat, ended alone and powerless. His story was retold as a warning: no ruler, no matter how great, can defy heaven and endure. Tang as the new ruler. After Jie's fall, Tang became the first king of the Shang dynasty. He is remembered as ruling with wisdom, moderation, and justice. His government reduced taxes, cared for the people, and restored rituals. Tang's rise was framed as a new dawn, a dynasty founded not on conquest alone but on virtue. The contrast with Jie was deliberate. Where Jie took, Tang gave; where Jie ignored heaven, Tang honored it. This contrast became the moral foundation of the transition, making the Shang not merely successors but restorers of cosmic order. Archaeological hints. Archaeology cannot confirm the details of Jie or Tang. But sites from the Erlitou period show decline around 1600 BCE, just as Shang centers like Zhou began to rise. This suggests a real transition of power, even if the stories of Jie's wine lakes are moral embellishments. In this sense, the legend of Xia's fall may preserve memory of genuine upheaval, rival states rising, conflict breaking out, dynasties shifting. The moral framing: tyranny punished, virtue rewarded, transformed history into lesson. The symbolic importance of Xia's fall. The Xia's fall was more than an end, it was a beginning. By casting Jie as tyrant and Tang as virtuous victor, later historians set a pattern for how every dynastic transition would be remembered. Dynasties fall because they lose virtue. New dynasties rise because they embody it. This cycle, first told of Xia and Shang, became the heartbeat of Chinese historiography. Reflection. The fall of the Xia reminds us that history is often told less as record than as lesson. Whether Jie truly built wine lakes or not, his memory became a warning. Whether Tang truly prayed before battle or not, his memory became a model. Through their fall and rise, the Xia and Shang gave China its first great narrative of dynastic change, a narrative that would be repeated, with variations, for 3,000 years. Closing image. Imagine the battlefield of Mingtiao. Storm clouds gather, rain lashes the earth. Jie's troops stumble in mud, their confidence broken. Tang's soldiers advance, banners streaming, their hearts lifted by the storm that seems sent from heaven. When the battle ends, Jie flees into the night, and a new dawn begins for China. Looking ahead. In the next part of our journey, we will step into the early Shang dynasty itself. We will explore the world Tang built after his victory, its rituals, its bronzes, its ancestors, and its beginnings as the first dynasty confirmed by archaeology. With the fall of the Xia and the defeat of King Jie at the Battle of Mingtiao, a new dynasty rose to prominence, the Shang. Where the Xia are half-shadow, remembered mostly in legend and faint archaeological echoes, the Shang bring us closer to the world of verifiable history. In their bronzes, their oracle bones, their palaces, and their tombs, the Shang left behind a legacy that allows us to see, hear, and almost touch the early dynastic world of China. Tonight, we step into the dawn of the Shang dynasty. We follow Tang the Victorious as he establishes a new order, explore the society that flourished under his successors, and witness how the Shang became the first dynasty that archaeology confirms. In their story, the myths of Xia give way to the first written records, and China enters the light of early history. Tang the Victorious. Tang, the founder of the Shang, is remembered as a man of virtue and balance. After overthrowing Jie, he did not indulge in revenge or cruelty. Instead, he presented himself as a restorer of harmony. Texts say Tang reduced burdens on the people, lowered taxes, and devoted himself to rituals honoring heaven and ancestors. He portrayed himself not as a conqueror but as heaven's chosen, a man carrying out the cosmic will to replace tyranny with justice. This portrayal reinforced the mandate of heaven principle, that dynasties endure only through virtue, and that their fall is both natural and just when corruption takes hold. Tang embodied this principle as its first victorious example. Establishing the Shang capital. The Shang did not settle in one capital for their entire history. Instead, they shifted their political centers multiple times across the Yellow River Valley. The earliest capital was likely at Bo, near modern Shangqiu, where Tang first established his rule. These capitals were more than administrative centers, they were ritual centers, where the king offered sacrifice, conducted divination, and reinforced his legitimacy. The Shang king was not merely a ruler but the high priest of his people, a role inherited from Xia traditions but elaborated with new intensity. The Shang kingship. In the Shang worldview, the king was the axis of the cosmos. He mediated between the living and the dead, between humanity and heaven. His authority rested not only on force but on ritual and divination. The Shang king consulted ancestors through oracle bones, offered sacrifices in elaborate ceremonies, and commanded artisans to produce bronzes that embodied cosmic order. His role was total, political, spiritual, and economic. To disobey the king was not merely treason but sacrilege. This conception of kingship grew stronger in the Shang, supported by archaeological evidence that allows us to glimpse its reality. Bronze and power. If Erlita gave us the first small bronzes, the Shang give us their flowering. The Shang perfected bronze casting, producing large and ornate ritual vessels, weapons, and ornaments. Bronze vessels such as ding, tripods, guei, bowls, and ju, wine cups, were cast in intricate designs, often with animal motifs, dragons, tigers, owls, that carried spiritual meaning. These vessels were not used for daily meals but for rituals, offerings of food and drink to ancestors and gods. Weapons of bronze, dagger axes, spearheads, arrowheads, gave the Shang military power, but more importantly, they reinforced hierarchy. Only elites could wield such weapons, linking martial power with social rank. Bronze was both technology and theology. To control it was to control the sacred. Oracle bones and writing. The Shang also bring us the earliest written records in Chinese history. On oracle bones, turtle shells and ox scapulae, diviners carved questions to ancestors and gods. After applying heat until cracks appeared, they interpreted the patterns as answers. The inscriptions record questions about war, harvests, weather, childbirth, and ritual. They reveal the concerns of kings and the rhythms of Shang life. They also represent the earliest form of Chinese writing, directly ancestral to the characters used today. This is where legend gives way to history. In oracle bones, we have the voices of Shang kings, their names and deeds preserved not as myth but as record. Shang religion. Like the Xia before them, the Shang centered religion on ancestors. But their rituals became more elaborate, their sacrifices more intense. Animal offerings were common, and in some cases, human sacrifice was performed to accompany kings in death or to honor ancestors in major ceremonies. The Shang also worshipped Shangdi, a high god associated with the heavens. Though ancestors remained central, Shangdi embodied cosmic authority. The king, through divination and sacrifice, claimed to communicate with this highest power. Thus, Shang religion blended the familial with the cosmic, making the king the mediator of both. Society and daily life. The Shang society was hierarchical, divided into elites, artisans, farmers, and slaves. Elites lived in palatial compounds, conducted rituals, and led armies. Artisans worked in specialized workshops, producing bronzes, pottery, jade, and bone tools. Farmers cultivated millet and rice, sustaining the society with their labor. Slaves or captives provided labor, and sometimes lives, for ritual sacrifice. This hierarchy was reflected in burials, where elite tombs contained bronzes, jades, chariots, and even human attendants, while common graves were plain. Daily life for most was agricultural, tied to seasons, but always overshadowed by the rituals and demands of the ruling class. Archaeological confirmation. Unlike the Xia, the Shang are archaeologically confirmed. Sites like Zhengzhou, an early capital, and Anyang, the later capital, reveal palaces, workshops, and royal tombs. At Anyang, the tomb of Fu Hao, a Shang queen and general, was found intact, filled with bronzes, jades, and weapons. Oracle bone inscriptions mention her by name, confirming that the texts and the archaeology align. This level of confirmation makes the Shang the first dynasty we can study with both tradition and material record. The Xia linger in debate, but the Shang stand firmly in history. The transition from Xia to Shang. The Shang rise was remembered as a moral victory over Xia corruption. But in material terms, it was also a cultural transition. Erlitu's palaces and bronzes flowed naturally into Shang's larger, more ornate forms. The Shang did not emerge from nothing, they built on the foundations of Xia, continuing and expanding traditions. In this sense, the Xia and Shang are not two separate worlds but two stages of one process, the emergence of early Chinese civilization. Reflection. The dawn of the Shang marks a turning point. In their bronzes and oracle bones, China steps into written history. Their kingship, rituals, and warfare give us a clearer picture of early dynastic life. But the Shang also remind us that dynasties are not only about material remains, they are about meaning. Their rise framed as heaven's will, their rituals as cosmic necessity, their kings as mediators between human and divine, all these set patterns that endured for millennia. Closing image. Picture Tang of Shang, the virtuous conqueror, standing before his people. Behind him, artisans pour bronze into molds, priests carve questions onto turtle shells, farmers harvest millet in golden fields. A new dynasty has dawned, not just a kingdom of earth, but a kingdom of meaning, where heaven and ancestors guide the fate of all. Looking ahead. In the next part of our journey, we will move deeper into the Shang world, exploring the capitals and cities of the Shang dynasty. Their layout, their palaces, their workshops, and their role as both political and ritual centers. Every dynasty needs a heart, a place where rulers govern, rituals are performed, and artisans labor to produce the objects of power. For the Shang dynasty, this heart was not a single unchanging city but a series of shifting capitals, each leaving its mark on the landscape and memory. From the early settlements near Zhou to the later grandeur of Anyang, the Shang capitals reveal a civilization at once mobile and monumental, rooted in ritual but responsive to the needs of politics and power. Tonight, we walk through the cities of the Shang. We wander their rammed earth walls, step into their palatial compounds, visit their bronze foundries, and descend into their royal tombs. Through these capitals, we glimpse how the Shang kings lived, ruled, and sanctified their authority. The nature of Shang capitals. Unlike later dynasties, which anchored themselves in long-lasting capitals like Chang'an or Luoyang, the Shang shifted their political centers multiple times. Archaeological evidence suggests at least 5 major capitals across their history. Why did they move? Several reasons may explain it. Floods and environmental pressures, especially from the volatile Yellow River. Political shifts, as rival clans rose or fell. Ritual needs, with each king establishing his own sacred center. Strategic concerns, locating the capital closer to enemies or resources. This mobility shows that the Shang dynasty was dynamic, adjusting to circumstance while maintaining continuity of culture and ritual. Zhou, an early Shang capital. One of the earliest confirmed Shang capitals was near modern Zhou in Hunan province. Here, archaeologists uncovered vast rammed earth walls, enclosing an area of over 3 square kilometers. Inside these walls lay palaces, workshops, and ritual areas. Bronze foundries produced weapons and vessels, while jade workshops crafted ornaments. Storage pits held grain, proof of agricultural surplus. The walls themselves were a marvel, massive earthen ramparts built with labor from thousands. They marked not only defense but also authority, a physical symbol of the king's power to mobilize and command. In Zhou, we see the Shang as a dynasty already sophisticated, already centralized, already shaping cities into instruments of power. The mobile capitals. Between Zhou and Anyang, the Shang kings moved their capitals several times. Each site, though less excavated, reveals similar patterns: walls, palatial compounds, workshops, and tombs. These mobile centers remind us that the Shang were still close to their tribal roots. Kingship was not yet tied to a single immovable city. Instead, legitimacy came from the king himself, his ability to command labor, perform rituals, and connect with heaven and ancestors. Wherever the king was, there was the center. Anyang, the great capital of Yin. The most famous Shang capital is Anyang, also called Yin, established in the late Shang around 1300 BCE. Here, the dynasty reached its height, leaving behind an archaeological record unmatched in early Chinese history. At Anyang, archaeologists uncovered palatial foundations, with rammed earth platforms and vast courtyards. Workshops, producing bronzes, jades, pottery, and bone tools. Royal tombs, filled with treasures, chariots, and sacrificial victims. Oracle bones, inscribed with divinations, the earliest Chinese writing. Anyang was more than a city, it was a sacred and political center, a place where kings ruled, ancestors were worshipped, and the cosmos was consulted. The palaces. At Anyang, palace foundations reveal large rectangular platforms of rammed earth, some hundreds of feet long. On these platforms once stood wooden halls where kings lived, governed, and conducted rituals. These palaces were not stone monuments like Egypt's pyramids, but they embodied power through scale and labor. The sheer effort of building them demonstrated the king's ability to command thousands. Within their walls, kings received tribute, planned wars, and presided over sacrifices. The palace was not only a residence but a temple and court, the beating heart of Shang authority. The workshops. Surrounding the palaces were specialized workshops. Bronze foundries melted ore in clay furnaces, pouring molten metal into clay molds to create vessels and weapons. Pottery kilns baked storage jars and ritual tripods. Jade workshops shaped ornaments of spiritual power. These workshops reveal an economy of specialization. Artisans lived near their work, producing for the court and ritual needs. Their craft was not private enterprise but state-directed production, controlled by the king and his officials. Through these workshops, the king's authority extended into every vessel, every ornament, every tool used in ritual and daily life. The tombs. No feature of Anyang is more striking than its royal tombs. Vast pits, some over 20 meters deep, contain not only the remains of kings and queens but also treasures and attendants. The most famous is the tomb of Fu Hao, queen and general of King Wuding. Her tomb, found intact, held over 1,600 objects, bronze vessels, jade ornaments, bone carvings, and weapons. Oracle bones record her leading armies and performing rituals, showing that women could wield significant power in Shang society. Other tombs contained chariots, horses, and human sacrifices. The dead were not buried alone, they were accompanied by attendants and offerings, ensuring their continued authority in the spirit world. Oracle bones, the voice of the Shang. At Anyang, thousands of oracle bones have been discovered. On them are carved questions: will the harvest be good? Should we go to war? Will the queen's child be a boy? After heating the bones until they cracked, diviners interpreted the patterns as answers from ancestors or gods. Inscriptions were sometimes added, recording the question, the interpretation, and the outcome. These oracle bones give us the earliest Chinese writing and the first verifiable names of kings. They turn the Shang from legend into history, their concerns and rituals preserved in their own words. The city is ritual center. For the Shang, the capital was not merely a political hub, it was a ritual stage. Palaces, workshops, tombs, and oracle bones all revolved around the king's role as mediator. Sacrifices took place in courtyards, bronzes held offerings of wine, and divinations guided decisions. The entire city was an extension of the ritual system, binding people to ancestors, rulers to heaven, and society to cosmos. In this way, the Shang capital was unlike modern cities. It was not a marketplace first, though trade occurred. It was a temple city, a sacred court where human and divine met. Life beyond the walls. Beyond the palace and workshops, farmers sustained the city. Fields of millet and rice stretched along the river, tended by commoners who provided surplus for the elite. Villages surrounded the capital, their people tied to its demands for tribute, labor, and soldiers. The contrast was stark: within the walls, bronzes, jades, and rituals; beyond the walls, the toil of daily life. Yet together they formed one system, bound by the king's authority and the rituals that justified it. Reflection. The capitals of the Shang reveal a civilization both powerful and fragile, monumental and mobile. Zhengzhou's walls, Anyang's palaces, and the tombs of royal ancestors show us the scale of Shang authority. The oracle bones give us their voices, their questions, their fears. Through their cities, the Shang made their power tangible. They built with earth and wood, bronze and jade, but what they truly constructed was a system where ritual, rule, and society were inseparable. Closing image. Imagine Anyang at dusk. Smoke rises from bronze workshops, drums beat in palace courtyards, diviners heat oracle bones as kings await answers from ancestors. Farmers return from fields outside the walls, while artisans labor into the night. In the royal tombs, treasures and sacrifices wait in silence, eternal symbols of Shang power. The city breathes as a living ritual, every street and building part of the cosmic order. Looking ahead. In the next part of our journey, we will explore warfare and the military of the Shang dynasty. From bronze weapons to chariots, from divinations before battle to sacrifices afterward, the Shang army reveals how war and ritual intertwined in the early dynastic world. Civilizations are built not only through farming and ritual but also through conflict. The Shang dynasty, like the Xia before it, lived in a world of rival clans, contested lands, and constant threats. Yet warfare in the Shang was not only about conquest. It was also ritual, divination, and sacrifice. Their battles were fought with bronze weapons, led by kings who sought heaven's approval before striking, and remembered in oracle bone inscriptions that still speak to us today. Tonight, we step into the military world of the Shang. We will explore their weapons and tactics, the role of divination in battle, the introduction of the chariot, the nature of captives and sacrifice, and the ways warfare reinforced kingship. In the clash of armies and the crack of bronze blades, we hear both the violence of survival and the rhythm of cosmic order. The role of warfare in Shang society. For the Shang, war was inseparable from kingship. The king was not only a priest but also a general, responsible for leading armies, defending territory, and conquering rivals. Oracle bones show kings asking, will the campaign be successful? Should we attack the people? Will the harvest still thrive if we go to war? Victories were framed as signs of heaven's favor. Defeats were omens of decline. Thus, warfare was not only pragmatic but also sacred, a way to confirm or question the dynasty's legitimacy. The enemies of the Shang. The Shang did not rule in isolation. Surrounding them were rival groups, often identified in oracle bones as Fang, meaning tribes or regions. These included the Tufang, Chongfang, and Yifang, among others. Campaigns against these groups were frequent. Some battles sought to secure territory, others to obtain captives for labor and sacrifice. The Shang king, through war, both defended his realm and demonstrated his role as protector of the people and mediator of heaven's will. The weapons of war. Shang warfare was defined by the use of bronze weapons, which gave their armies an edge over stone or wooden arms. Gu, dagger axe, the signature weapon of early Chinese warfare. Mounted on a wooden shaft, the bronze blade could slash or stab. It was both practical and symbolic, often buried in tombs as a mark of authority. Spears and lances, long weapons tipped with bronze points, used for thrusting in close combat. Arrows and bows, archery was widespread, with bronze arrowheads replacing earlier stone. Knives and short blades, used in close fighting or as tools of sacrifice. These weapons were not mass-produced for all. Bronze was costly and controlled by elites. Common soldiers may still have used wood, stone, or bone arms, while nobles and the king's guard carried bronze. The chariot revolution. One of the most striking military innovations of the Shang was the chariot. Introduced around the late Shang period, likely from contacts with steppe cultures to the north and west, the chariot transformed warfare. Chariots were light, two-wheeled vehicles pulled by horses. Each carried a driver, an archer, and sometimes a spear-wielding warrior. They provided mobility, speed, and shock value on the battlefield. Oracle bones and tombs show chariots buried with elites, complete with horses and drivers. In Shang warfare, the chariot was both a weapon and a symbol of rank. To ride in one was to embody elite power, linking martial strength with cosmic authority. The organization of armies. The Shang army was likely organized around clans and villages, with common farmers serving as infantry during campaigns. Seasonal warfare meant men fought after planting or before harvest, returning to fields when possible. Elites commanded troops, wielding bronze weapons and riding chariots. Kings led major campaigns, sometimes personally, sometimes through generals. Diviners consulted ancestors before battles, ensuring that campaigns aligned with heaven's will. Armies could number in the thousands, impressive for the time. Captives taken in war replenished the labor force and fed the cycle of sacrifice. Divination before battle. Before any major campaign, Shang kings consulted oracle bones. Questions recorded include: should we attack the Fang people this month? Will victory be ours if we cross the river? Should we use 3,000 men or 5,000? Cracks in the bones revealed answers. Victories were later inscribed on the same bones, recording history through ritual. This shows how deeply warfare was tied to the sacred. Battles were not mere gambles but decisions guided by ancestors and heaven. Captives and sacrifice. Warfare brought not only territory but also captives. Oracle bones and tombs reveal that prisoners of war were often sacrificed in rituals. Some were buried alive, others executed, their lives offered to ancestors or gods. This practice, though brutal, reflected the Shang worldview. Captives were not only enemies but also offerings, tokens that reaffirmed the king's bond with the divine. the blood of captives watered the rituals that sustained kingship. At the same time, not all captives were killed. Some became laborers, artisans, or servants, integrated into Shang society under the dominance of elites. War and kingship. For the Shang king, war was a stage to prove virtue. Victory showed heaven's mandate, defeats hinted at decline. Campaigns expanded the dynasty's reach, brought tribute, and secured resources. But war was also ritual. Kings offered sacrifices before campaigns, divined the outcomes, and sacrificed captives afterward. The entire process turned violence into cosmic order, binding battle into the cycle of ritual life. Archaeological evidence of warfare. Archaeological finds confirm the Shang's martial culture. At Anyang, bronze weapons, dagger axes, spearheads, arrowheads, have been uncovered in abundance. Tombs contain chariots, horses, and warriors buried with their lords. Skeletal remains show signs of violent death, consistent with sacrifice or battle. Workshops reveal mass production of weapons, suggesting organized armies. These finds bring to life the military world described in texts and inscriptions, showing that war was as real as it was symbolic. The human cost. Behind the grandeur of Shang warfare lay human suffering. Farmers conscripted into armies left fields untended. Captives marched in chains to sacrifice. Families mourned sons lost in campaigns. Yet to the Shang, these costs were part of cosmic necessity. War was not random violence, it was heaven's will, ancestors' demand, society's order. To resist was not only dangerous but sacrilegious. Reflection. Shang warfare reveals a society where violence and ritual intertwined. Weapons were not only tools of death but symbols of power. Chariots were not only vehicles but emblems of rank. Battles were not only struggles but ceremonies of cosmic meaning. Through war, the Shang kings expanded their rule, reinforced their legitimacy, and connected their dynasty to heaven's mandate. Through sacrifice, they turned victory into ritual, ensuring that the blood of enemies nourished the bond between living and dead. Closing image. Imagine a Shang army preparing for battle. Farmers grip wooden spears, nobles polish bronze axes, chariots creak as horses stamp impatiently. The king stands at the front, diviners heating oracle bones, cracks whispering heaven's judgment. When the drums sound, the army advances, not only to fight, but to fulfill destiny. Looking ahead. In the next part of our journey, we will step away from the battlefield and into the rituals and religion of the Shang dynasty. With oracle bones, bronze vessels, and grand sacrifices, we will see how the Shang wove their entire world into the fabric of the sacred. For the Shang dynasty, power was not built only through bronze and war. It was sustained, legitimized, and sanctified through ritual. Every sacrifice, every libation of wine, every inscription carved onto oracle bones bound the dynasty into a cosmic order. The Shang world was one in which the spirits of ancestors were ever present, the high god Shangdi watched from above, and the king himself stood as mediator between heaven and earth. Tonight, we step into the ritual life of the Shang dynasty. We will explore ancestor worship, the role of Shangdi, the meaning of sacrifice, the function of oracle bones, and the way these practices held the dynasty together. In the flickering light of bronze vessels and the crack of heated bones, we glimpse a civilization where the sacred and the political were inseparable. Ancestor worship at the core. At the heart of Shang religion was ancestor worship. The Shang believed that their ancestors did not disappear at death but continued to influence the living. They could bring prosperity or disaster, harvest or famine, victory or defeat. To ensure harmony, the living had to honor the dead. This was done through sacrifices of food, wine, animals, and sometimes even human lives. Bronze vessels filled with millet wine were offered, meat was burned, and prayers were recited. Ancestor worship was not only spiritual, it was political. By claiming descent from powerful ancestors and by performing the correct rituals, Shang kings justified their rule. Their authority was sanctioned not just by human power but by the voices of the past. Shangdi, the high god. Beyond ancestors, the Shang also worshipped a supreme deity known as Shangdi. He was associated with the heavens, the forces of nature, and ultimate authority. Shang was distant, not easily approached by ordinary people. Only the king, through ritual and divination, could communicate with him. In this sense, the Shang king acted not only as priest of the ancestors but also as intermediary with the highest cosmic power. The worship of Shang was not separate from ancestor veneration but interwoven with it. The king's ancestors were seen as mediators, carrying messages upward to the divine. Thus, the Shang religious system formed a chain: people honored ancestors, ancestors interceded with Shang, and Shang maintained the cosmic balance. Sacrifice as communication. Sacrifice was central to Shang ritual. It was not merely destruction of life or goods, it was communication. By offering something valuable, the Shang believed they could open a channel to the spirit world. Animal sacrifice was common: cattle, dogs, and sheep were buried or burned in offerings. Human sacrifice also occurred, especially in royal tombs or major rituals. Captives of war often served this role, their lives offered as gifts to ancestors or gods. Food and drink were poured into the earth, believed to nourish the spirits below. These sacrifices were not random acts of cruelty but carefully staged ceremonies. They ensured that ancestors were fed, spirits appeased, and cosmic order upheld. Oracle bones, asking the ancestors. One of the most distinctive features of Shang ritual was divination with oracle bones. Kings and diviners would carve questions onto turtle shells or ox scapulae, such as: should we sacrifice 10 cattle or 20? Will the harvest be good if we plant now? Will the king's consort bear a son? Should we go to war with the Fang people? The bones were then heated until they cracked, and diviners interpreted the patterns. Answers were inscribed onto the bone, sometimes with the eventual outcome recorded as well. Through these inscriptions, we hear the actual voices of the Shang kings. Their concerns, war, harvest, weather, childbirth, were the concerns of a society bound to both survival and ritual. Bronze vessels, the tools of ritual. Bronze was not only a tool of war but also of ritual. The Shang cast elaborate vessels for offerings of wine and food. Ding, tripods, for cooking meat. Gui, bowls, for holding grain. Ju, wine cups, for pouring libations. Zun, vessels, shaped like animals, carrying symbolic meaning. These bronzes were decorated with intricate patterns: dragons, tigers, owls, that may have represented spiritual forces. To pour wine into a bronze was to connect with ancestors. To own bronzes was to hold ritual authority. Buried in tombs, these vessels continued their function in the afterlife, ensuring the dead could continue to feast and communicate with spirits. The king as high priest. In the Shang system, the king was the chief ritualist. He led sacrifices, consulted oracle bones, and offered to Shang. His role was not only political but cosmic. He stood at the center of the ritual web that bound people, ancestors, and gods together. This made his position unique. To disobey the king was not just rebellion against government, it was sacrilege, a disruption of the cosmic order. The king's authority rested as much on ritual as on military might. Ritual and society. Ritual was not limited to kings. At every level of Shang society, families honored ancestors with offerings. Commoners poured libations of millet wine, placed food before shrines, and remembered the dead in seasonal festivals. But the grandeur of royal rituals, with bronzes, human sacrifices, and oracle bones, set the Shang kings apart. Their rituals were larger, more powerful, more binding. They claimed a unique connection to heaven, a role ordinary people could not match. Thus, ritual reinforced hierarchy. Kings stood above nobles, nobles above commoners, commoners above captives. Each layer of society reflected the ritual structure, binding human order to cosmic order. Archaeological evidence. Archaeological sites confirm the richness of Shang ritual. At Anyang, altars and sacrificial pits filled with animal bones and human remains testify to ceremonies. Bronze vessels, jade ornaments, and oracle bones reveal the tools of ritual life. Royal tombs, such as that of Fu Hao, contained hundreds of bronzes, jades, and sacrificed attendants, showing the scale of devotion. These finds make Shang religion tangible, bridging the gap between myth and history. The meaning of ritual. At its core, Shang ritual was about order. In a world of floods, famines, and rival enemies, ritual created structure. It gave meaning to suffering, justified power, and promised connection to ancestors. By offering sacrifice, the Shang believed they ensured balance. By consulting oracle bones, they reduced uncertainty. By venerating ancestors, they affirmed continuity. Without ritual, the Shang would have been just another early kingdom. With ritual, they became a civilization, bound not only by politics but by meaning. Reflection. Ritual in the Shang dynasty reminds us that religion and politics were never separate. Every offering, every oracle, every bronze vessel was both sacred and social, both divine and political. In their rituals, the Shang kings secured their power, their people found meaning, and their ancestors remained alive in memory and influence. The dynasty was as much a temple as a kingdom, as much a sacred order as a political one. Closing image. Imagine a Shang king standing before an altar. Bronze vessels gleam in the firelight, filled with wine and food. Priests chant, drums beat, smoke rises into the sky. A diviner heats an oracle bone, cracks spreading across its surface as ancestors whisper their reply. The people watch in silence, knowing that in this ritual moment, heaven and earth are one. Looking ahead. In the next part of our journey, we will step deeper into Shang life, exploring the art and symbolism of the Shang dynasty. From jade carvings to bronze patterns, from animal motifs to mythic figures, we will see how the Shang expressed their worldview in material beauty. Civilizations speak not only through words but through images, patterns, and objects. In the Shang dynasty, art was not a matter of idle beauty, it was sacred, functional, and symbolic. Every carving in jade, every motif cast into bronze, every pattern painted onto pottery reflected a worldview in which humans, spirits, and nature were bound together. Tonight, we explore the art and symbolism of the Shang dynasty. We will walk through the intricate bronzes that defined their ritual life, the mysterious animal motifs that still puzzle historians, the jade ornaments that embody purity, and the artistic language through which the Shang expressed their identity. In their art, we see their gods, their ancestors, their animals, and their sense of cosmic order. Art as sacred expression. For the Shang, art was inseparable from ritual. A bronze vessel was not simply a container, it was a bridge between worlds. A jade carving was not a trinket, it was a symbol of purity and cosmic power. Unlike later dynasties that produced landscape paintings or calligraphy, Shang art was deeply tied to function. Objects were made for sacrifice, burial, or communication with ancestors. Yet within this functionality lay extraordinary creativity, revealing a civilization that poured its soul into sacred beauty. The world of bronze. The Shang are most famous for their bronze vessels, masterpieces of casting and design. These vessels, Ding, Gui, Ju, Yu, Zun, came in many shapes, each with a ritual purpose: cooking meat, holding grain, pouring wine, storing offerings. Bronze casting required immense skill. Shang artisans used the piece mold technique, crafting clay molds in sections, carving designs into them, and pouring molten metal inside. When cooled, the mold was broken, revealing the vessel. This meant each bronze was unique, the product of labor and artistry. The surfaces of these vessels were decorated with intricate patterns, the most iconic being the Taotie motif. The Taotie mask. Perhaps the most famous Shang symbol is the Taotie, a mask-like design that appears on countless bronzes. It is a symmetrical face, often with large eyes, horns, and fangs, sometimes so abstract it seems to dissolve into swirls of lines. What did the Taotie mean? Scholars debate. Some see it as a protective spirit, warding off evil. Others interpret it as a symbol of gluttony or warning against excess. Still others view it as representing animals or composite beings, embodying the Shang's spiritual vision of a world alive with creatures and powers. Whatever its meaning, the Taotie reveals the Shang's imagination, a world of masks, faces, and spirits looking out from every vessel. When wine was poured, the Taotie's eyes watched. When food was offered, its mouth seemed to consume. Other animal motifs. Beyond the Taotie, Shang bronzes depict a wide range of animals. Dragons, associated with water, storms, and cosmic power. Tigers, symbols of strength and ferocity. Owls, linked to night, mystery, and death. Birds and serpents, embodying flight and transformation. These animals were not decorations in the modern sense. They were symbols, embodiments of forces the Shang sought to harness or honor in ritual. Jade, the stone of heaven. Alongside bronze, jade was central to Shang art. Jade, with its hardness and translucence, was seen as pure, eternal, and spiritually potent. Shang jade objects included ritual blades and axes, symbolizing power. Ornaments and pendants, worn by elites as signs of status. Small carvings, often of animals like dragons or birds. Jade was placed in tombs, worn in life, and offered in ritual. It symbolized a bridge between human and spirit, embodying values of endurance and purity that would echo throughout Chinese civilization. Bone and ivory carvings. Shang artisans also worked with bone and ivory, carving them into ornaments, tools, and ritual objects. Some were inlaid with turquoise, shimmering with color. Oracle bones themselves, inscribed and burned in divination, were also works of ritual art. The carved questions, the cracks of fire, the recorded answers, all became part of the aesthetic and symbolic landscape of Shang ritual. Pottery and everyday art. Not all Shang art was elite or bronze. Pottery, though less ornate, played a vital role. Large storage jars, cooking vessels, and cups were crafted for daily use. Some were decorated with painted designs or simple patterns. Though humbler, this pottery reflects the same aesthetic of order, symmetry, and symbolic form. Even the simplest vessels carried a sense of rhythm, showing that beauty permeated Shang life at every level. Architecture as art. The Shang did not build in stone, but their rammed earth palaces and tombs were monumental works of art in themselves. Large courtyards, raised platforms, and symmetrical layouts reflected the same order seen in bronzes. Tombs were especially artistic. Designed not just as graves but as eternal homes, they contained layers of objects arranged with symbolic care, bronzes to feed the dead, jades to protect them, chariots and horses to carry them, attendants to serve them. Each tomb was both a statement of power and a cosmic composition. Symbolism in Shang art. What ties Shang art together is its symbolism. Every motif, every pattern, every object had meaning beyond its surface. The Taotie was not only a mask but a reminder of spirits watching. Dragons and tigers were not only animals but embodiments of natural forces. Bronze vessels were not only containers but sacred instruments of ritual. Jade ornaments were not only beautiful but carriers of cosmic purity. This symbolic art reflected the Shang worldview, a cosmos alive with spirits, ancestors, and powers, where humans survived by honoring and balancing them through ritual. Artistic legacy. The artistic language of the Shang did not end with their dynasty. The Taotie motif, bronze vessels, jade carvings, all continued into the Zhou and beyond. Chinese art, through centuries of change, retained this symbolic richness, always carrying echoes of the Shang vision. Even today, when visitors gaze upon a Shang bronze in a museum, they feel its weight, its strangeness, its power. It is not only an artifact but a presence, an object that still whispers of ancestors, spirits, and a worldview half lost but never forgotten. Reflection. The art of the Shang dynasty reminds us that beauty and meaning were inseparable. Their vessels were not meant to be admired in isolation but to be used in ritual, filled with wine, offered to ancestors, buried in tombs. Their jade ornaments were not trinkets but symbols of cosmic order. Through art, the Shang expressed their beliefs, reinforced their hierarchy, and bound themselves to the cosmos. Their patterns and motifs are not only visually striking but deeply revealing of their worldview. Closing image. Picture a ritual in the Shang court. Bronze vessels gleam in the firelight, their surfaces alive with taotia masks and dragons. Jade pendants shine at the waists of nobles, while diviners carve questions into bones. In the flicker of shadows, owls and tigers seem to leap from the bronzes, joining the ancestors in the smoke. Art is not decoration, it is presence, spirit, and power. Looking ahead. In the next part of our journey, we will turn to the economy and daily life of the Shang dynasty. From farmers in the fields to artisans in workshops, from markets to tribute, we will see how the Shang sustained their civilization beneath the grandeur of ritual and art. The Shang dynasty is remembered for its bronzes, oracle bones, and grand rituals, but beneath this glittering surface lay a society sustained by countless hands. Farmers who tilled the earth, artisans who shaped tools and vessels, traders who moved goods, and servants who labored in fields and workshops, all contributed to the foundation of Shang power. The economy of the Shang was not just a system of production, it was an extension of their worldview, one that tied agriculture, tribute, and craft to the cosmic order overseen by the king. Tonight, we leave the palaces and tombs to walk among the villages, fields, and workshops of the Shang world. We will explore agriculture, craft production, trade, social hierarchy, and daily life, seeing how ordinary people sustained a dynasty whose kings spoke to heaven. The agricultural foundation. At the base of Shang society was agriculture. Without harvests of grain, no rituals could be performed, no armies fed, no bronzes cast. The Shang heartland along the Yellow River was fertile but unpredictable. Floods and droughts were constant threats. Farmers grew millet as the staple crop, supplemented by wheat, barley, and rice in suitable areas. Fields were worked with wooden and bone tools, though bronze sickles and spades may have been used by elites. Domesticated animals also played a role. Cattle, pigs, sheep, and dogs were raised for food and sacrifice. Horses, newly introduced, pulled chariots and later became symbols of elite status. Agriculture was tied directly to ritual. Planting and harvest were accompanied by offerings to ancestors and Shangdi, seeking blessings for abundance. To farm was not only labor, it was devotion. Tribute and redistribution. The Shang economy was not market-driven in the modern sense. Instead, it was structured through tribute and redistribution. Local communities provided grain, animals, textiles, and labor to the king. These goods flowed into the capital, filling storage pits and warehouses. From there, they were redistributed to nobles, soldiers, artisans, and priests. This system reinforced hierarchy. Commoners did not trade freely with the king, they contributed to him as part of their duty. The king, in turn, displayed generosity by redistributing wealth, reinforcing loyalty and dependence. Tribute was not merely economic but ritual. To present grain or cattle to the king was to affirm the cosmic order, acknowledging the ruler as mediator between people and heaven. Artisans and workshops. Artisans were essential to Shang life, especially those who worked with bronze, jade, pottery, and bone. Bronze workers smelted ore, built molds, and cast vessels and weapons. Their work was highly specialized, requiring knowledge of clay, fire, and metal. Jade carvers shaped the hardest stone into ornaments, symbols of purity and status. Potters produced jars, tripods, and cups for both daily use and ritual. Bone and ivory workers made tools, combs, ornaments, and inscriptions. These artisans often lived in specialized quarters near workshops. Their labor was likely organized by the state, directed toward fulfilling the needs of the court. A bronze vessel was not a private commission but a product of collective, state-controlled effort. Trade and exchange. Though tribute was central, trade also existed. The Shang exchanged goods with neighboring peoples and perhaps farther regions. Jade may have come from distant mountains, brought by traders or tribute. Turquoise ornaments found at sites like Erlita suggest long-distance exchange. Cattle, horses, and captives were acquired through warfare and incorporated into the economy. Markets for daily goods likely existed in villages, where people exchanged food, textiles, and tools. However, long-distance trade was less about profit and more about prestige, ritual, and alliance. Social hierarchy and economy. The Shang economy reflected and reinforced social hierarchy. The king and royal family controlled the flow of resources. They commanded tribute, redistributed wealth, and oversaw ritual production. Nobles managed local territories, collecting tribute from commoners and sending it upward. They received bronzes, chariots, and ornaments in return. Artisans labored under elite control, producing goods for the state. Farmers formed the majority, working fields, raising animals, and providing labor. Slaves and captives performed the harshest work, sometimes sacrificed in rituals. Each level of society was bound to the others, not through free choice but through obligation and ritualized duty. Housing and villages. Daily life for most Shang people took place in small villages of wattle-and-daub houses, built of wood and earth. Roofs were thatched, floors sometimes sunken into the ground. Hearths provided heat and cooking, with pottery jars for storing grain. Villages clustered around fields, forming communities tied by kinship and overseen by local nobles. Life was simple but structured, marked by cycles of planting, harvest, tribute, and ritual. Food and drink. The Shang diet reflected their agriculture. Millet was the staple grain, eaten as porridge or baked into simple cakes. Meat from pigs, sheep, and cattle supplemented meals, though commoners ate it less frequently than elites. Wine made from fermented millet was central, used in both daily life and ritual. Bronze vessels for wine offerings reveal its sacred role. Drinking was not only pleasure but communication with ancestors, a way to blur the line between living and dead. Clothing and textiles. Clothing in the Shang period was made primarily of hemp and silk. Commoners wore hemp garments, simple and functional, while elites dressed in silk robes, often dyed and embroidered. Silk production was already known, though it remained an elite luxury. The presence of silk garments in tombs shows its value as a symbol of refinement and status. Leisure and music. Life was not only work and ritual. The Shang valued music and dance, often performed in ceremonies. Drums, bells, and flutes made of bone have been found, suggesting a vibrant musical culture. Hunting and feasting were also forms of leisure for elites, reinforcing social bonds and displaying wealth. For commoners, festivals tied to agriculture provided moments of joy and community. The weight of labor. Yet life for most was laborious. Farmers worked under the sun, artisans toiled in workshops, captives dug in fields or awaited sacrifice. The Shang system was hierarchical and demanding, extracting labor and resources to sustain the grandeur of kingship. Still, this labor was not seen as mere exploitation. In the Shang worldview, it was part of the cosmic order. Farmers fed ancestors through offerings of grain, artisans crafted vessels that linked worlds, captives became sacrifices that renewed harmony. All were bound into the ritual economy. Archaeological glimpses. Archaeology gives us vivid glimpses of Shang daily life. Storage pits filled with grain. Simple pottery used in kitchens. Tools made of bone and bronze. Remains of houses clustered in villages. Workshops with broken molds and tools scattered across the ground. These fragments remind us that behind the palaces and bronzes stood countless ordinary lives, each contributing to the dynasty's survival. Reflection. The Shang economy and daily life reveal a civilization sustained by interdependence. Kings ruled with bronze and ritual, but they depended on farmers' grain, artisans' skill, and captives' labor. Nobles commanded tribute, but they too were tied into the system of redistribution and ritual. Life was hierarchical, demanding, and often harsh, but it was also meaningful. Every harvest, every offering, every crafted bronze was part of a cosmic order that bound the Shang world together. Closing image. Picture a Shang village at dawn. Farmers step into fields of millet, their wooden plows pulled by oxen. In workshops near the capital, artisans pour molten bronze into molds, sparks flying in the smoky air. In palaces, nobles receive tribute of grain and cattle. All of it flows upward, toward the king, who offers it to ancestors and heaven. In this cycle of labor and devotion, the Shang dynasty lives. Looking ahead. In the next part of our journey, we will explore the role of women in the Shang dynasty. From queens like Fu Hao to common women in villages, we will see how women contributed to politics, ritual, and daily life in early China. When we think of ancient dynasties, we often imagine kings, generals, and priests, men holding the reins of power. Yet the Shang dynasty reveals a more complex story. Women played vital roles in the political, religious, and economic life of their society. From queens who led armies to village women who sustained households, the contributions of women were woven deeply into the Shang fabric. Their presence appears in tombs, oracle bones, and artifacts, reminding us that the story of the Shang was never only male, it was shared. Tonight, we step into the lives of women in the Shang dynasty. We will meet figures like Fu Hao, the warrior queen, explore the daily lives of common women, examine their role in ritual and family, and reflect on how their stories expand our understanding of early Chinese civilization. Women in Shang society. The Shang world was hierarchical, and gender was part of that order. Men held formal kingship, led most rituals, and dominated political structures. Yet women were far from absent. They appear in oracle bone inscriptions, in tombs filled with treasures, and in the lineage of the dynasty itself. Shang society was patrilineal, descent passed through the father, but women married into noble families, forming alliances between clans. Queens, consorts, and mothers of kings influenced politics from behind the scenes, while some took roles that were anything but hidden. Fu Hao, the warrior queen. The most famous Shang woman is Fu Hao, wife of King Wuding in the late Shang. Her story is extraordinary, preserved in both oracle bones and her tomb discovered at Anyang. Fu Hao was not only a queen but also a military commander. Oracle bone inscriptions record her leading troops into battle, commanding thousands of soldiers against enemies like the Tu Fang. She was also a priestess, performing important rituals on behalf of the king and ancestors. Her tomb, discovered intact, contained over 1,600 objects, including 468 bronze vessels and weapons, jade ornaments, ivory carvings, and treasures of immense value. Remains of attendants and captives sacrificed for her burial. This wealth reflects her power and prestige. Fu Hao was not merely a consort, she was a leader in her own right, remembered by name across 3,000 years. Women in ritual. Women played vital roles in ritual life. Queens and consorts joined kings in sacrifices to ancestors, sometimes acting as intermediaries themselves. Some oracle bones record women performing divinations or rituals. Their presence in tombs with bronzes and jades also suggests ritual authority. At the household level, women maintained ancestor worship through offerings at family shrines. They prepared food and wine for ceremonies, ensuring the continuity of devotion across generations. Women in family and marriage. For most women, life centered on family and household. Marriage was arranged to strengthen clan ties. A bride joined her husband's family, contributing labor, loyalty, and children to continue the lineage. Women managed domestic tasks, preparing food, weaving textiles, raising children, and supporting agricultural labor. These contributions were essential. Without their work, the surplus that sustained rituals and kingship would not exist. Marriage also linked women into the political order. Through marriage alliances, noble women carried influence across clans, sometimes acting as quiet mediators between powerful families. Women in villages. The majority of Shang women lived not in palaces but in villages, where life was demanding but vital. Village women worked in fields, tended animals, and produced textiles. Weaving hemp and silk was their specialty, providing clothing for households and elites. They managed cooking, childcare, and ritual offerings at family shrines. Archaeological remains of simple pottery, loom weights, and spindle whorls reveal their daily world. Though their names are lost, their labor formed the backbone of Shang survival. Women and textiles. Textiles were one of the great contributions of women in the Shang. Hemp was widely used, spun into cloth for common garments. But silk, delicate and precious, was already being produced. The silkworm was tended by women, its cocoons unwound into fine threads. Silk garments, dyed and embroidered, became symbols of status. Found in elite tombs, they remind us that women's labor in textiles produced objects of both beauty and prestige. Mothers and ancestors. In Shang thought, women also held power as mothers and ancestors. A queen mother could wield significant influence over her son the king. In ritual, female ancestors were honored alongside male ones, their spirits invoked in divination and sacrifice. Thus, even after death, women's roles continued. As ancestors, they shaped the fortunes of the living, reminding us that lineage was not only male but shared across generations. Captive women. Not all women in the Shang lived privileged or secure lives. Warfare brought captives into Shang society, and many were women. Some became servants or laborers, contributing to households or workshops. Others were sacrificed in rituals, buried in pits or tombs as offerings to ancestors and gods. These women, though voiceless in the records, reveal the harsh realities of a society where power and ritual demanded human lives. Archaeological evidence. Archaeology provides glimpses into women's lives. Fu Hao's tomb, a monument to female power. Textile tools, showing women's labor in weaving. Domestic remains, from cooking vessels to spindle whorls. Burials of noble women, with bronzes and jades. Burials of common women, simpler but still tied to family ritual. These finds remind us that women's presence was everywhere, from grand tombs to humble households. The balance of power. The role of women in the Shang was complex. On one hand, society was patriarchal, kingship male, descent patrilineal. On the other, women like Fu Hao commanded armies, performed rituals, and were buried with treasures. Even common women held essential roles in sustaining households and rituals. The balance of power was not equal, but it was layered, with women's influence flowing through family, ritual, economy, and sometimes politics and war. Legacy of Shang women. The memory of women like Fu Hao has endured, challenging assumptions about ancient roles. Her story proves that women could rise to extraordinary heights in early China. The work of countless unnamed women ensured the dynasty's survival, weaving the threads of daily life into the fabric of civilization. Later dynasties often narrowed women's public roles, but the Shang remind us that in China's beginnings, women were both leaders and sustainers, warriors and weavers, mothers and ancestors. Reflection. The story of women in the Shang dynasty is the story of balance, between public power and domestic duty, between queens with armies and villagers with looms, between mothers who guided kings and captives who fed rituals. Their lives were diverse, their contributions immense, their presence undeniable. Through their labor, devotion, and sometimes leadership, women shaped the Shang world as much as men, though history often remembers them less. In telling their story, we see the dynasty not only as a kingdom of kings but as a society of families, mothers, daughters, and wives. Closing image. Imagine Fu Hao leading her troops, bronze axe in hand, banners streaming in the wind. Imagine a village woman weaving silk, threads glimmering in the light. Imagine a mother placing food at a family shrine, calling to ancestors. In each scene, women sustain the Shang, not always visible, not always remembered, but always present. Looking ahead. In the next part of our journey, we will explore the myths and legends of the Shang dynasty, blending archaeology with stories passed down through centuries. These tales, like the myths of Yu and the Xia, reveal how the Shang imagined their origins, their gods, and their destiny. History is written in bones, bronzes, and ruins, but memory is preserved in myths. For the Shang dynasty, archaeology gives us vessels and tombs, while oral tradition and later writings give us stories of kings, gods, and heroes. These myths are not literal history, yet they reveal how the Shang imagined their place in the cosmos. They speak of divine favor, ancestral power, and the constant struggle between virtue and corruption. Tonight, we wander into the mythic landscape of the Shang dynasty. We will hear tales of their legendary founder Tang, stories of Shangdi the High God, omens in storms and animals, and legends that blurred the line between fact and morality. In these myths, the Shang became more than a dynasty, they became part of a cosmic drama stretching from heaven to earth. Tang the Virtuous. The Shang's founding king, Tang the Victorious, was remembered not just as a conqueror but as a moral exemplar. Stories say he ruled with moderation, reduced taxes, and cared for his people. When drought struck, he prayed to heaven, offering his own life if it would bring rain. Rain fell, proving his sincerity and heaven's approval. This tale shows how the Shang viewed rulership, not simply as command but as harmony with heaven. Tang's virtue justified the Shang's rule, his example the opposite of Jie's corruption. Shangdi in the high heavens. Above all ancestors and spirits stood Shangdi, the supreme god of the Shang. Though distant and mysterious, Shangdi was believed to control weather, harvest, war, and fate. Oracle bones reveal prayers to Shangdi for victory in battle, rain for crops, and safety in childbirth. Shang kings claimed they alone could communicate with Shangdi, often through the spirits of their ancestors. This divine hierarchy, people, ancestors, Shangdi, gave the dynasty its sacred foundation. Later dynasties would reinterpret Shangdi, but for the Shang, he was the highest force, the one whose favor sustained the dynasty's survival. The mandate of heaven foreshadowed. Though the phrase, mandate of heaven, belongs to the Zhou, Shang myths already carried the seeds of this idea. Stories of Tang's virtue and Jie's downfall framed heaven as choosing rulers based on morality. Legends said that heaven sent omens, storms, eclipses, droughts, as warnings of corruption. A virtuous king could interpret and respond, a corrupt one ignored them and fell. Thus, Shang myths foreshadowed the great cycle of Chinese political thought: dynasties rise with virtue, fall with vice. Myths of omens and animals. Shang myths are filled with omens. Animals, weather, and celestial events were not random, they were messages. An owl flying over the palace might foretell death. A storm before battle could signal heaven's disfavor. Unusual births, like two-headed calves, were warnings of imbalance. These myths appear even in oracle bones, where strange events were inscribed as questions. The Shang saw the natural world as alive with meaning, every sign a whisper of heaven. The legend of Wu Ding and Fu Hao. Later traditions embroidered legends around King Wu Ding and his queen Fu Hao. Wu Ding was remembered as a king who sought wisdom, ruling through virtue and consultation. Fu Hao, his warrior consort, became legendary not only for commanding armies but for her devotion and ritual. Stories say she led troops with divine blessing, that her victories were heaven's gift. Her early death was lamented in inscriptions, showing her mythic status even in her lifetime. Her tomb, discovered intact, later seemed to confirm the legend, making her both historical and mythical. The Shang and the spirits. Shang myths emphasize a world alive with spirits, of rivers, mountains, storms, and animals. These spirits could bless or harm, requiring offerings to appease. Legends told of floods as punishments, storms as signs of anger, victories as gifts of favor. Shamans and diviners acted as interpreters of these forces. Myths often featured them calling rain, reading omens, or communicating with ancestors. In this sense, every myth reinforced the king's role as supreme shaman, the one whose rituals kept chaos at bay. The fall of corrupt kings. Shang myths also warned against corruption within their own dynasty. Just as Jie's tyranny brought down the Xia, Shang kings who neglected ritual or indulged in excess were remembered darkly. Some tales speak of kings who ignored omens, who taxed too heavily, or who drank too much wine. Their failures were framed as moral lessons, cautioning future rulers. These myths became tools of memory, shaping the dynasty's self-image even before its fall. Myths of creation and order. Though less preserved than later Chinese creation myths, Shang stories hinted at beliefs about cosmic order. The world was seen as layered, heaven above, earth below, ancestors in between. Ritual was the thread tying these layers together. Legends of dragons and serpents may have represented forces of water and fertility. Birds symbolized flight between worlds. Through myth, the Shang expressed a cosmos alive with beings that demanded respect, offerings, and interpretation. Myth as morality. Ultimately, Shang myths were not entertainment but instruction. They taught that kings must be virtuous, that ancestors must be honored, that omens must be read. They reminded people that their world was fragile, dependent on harmony between human action and cosmic will. Even the grandest stories, like Tang praying for rain or Fu Hao leading armies, were moral examples, showing how devotion and virtue secured heaven's favor. Archaeological echoes of myth. Archaeology sometimes seems to echo these myths. Storm patterns recorded in oracle bones match climatic shifts. Sacrificial pits align with tales of offerings to spirits. Tomb treasures recall the wealth described in stories. While myths are not literal records, they capture truths of belief, memory, and meaning. They show us how the Shang explained their world, even when archaeology alone cannot. Reflection. The myths and legends of the Shang dynasty reveal a civilization that saw itself at the center of a cosmic drama. Kings prayed to heaven, ancestors carried messages, omens warned of imbalance, and queens became legendary. Their stories blended fact and morality, shaping how history would be remembered for millennia. Though archaeology gives us bones and bronzes, it is myth that gives us meaning. Through myth, the Shang became not only a dynasty of power but a dynasty of stories. Closing image. Picture a Shang storyteller at night, sitting by firelight. Children and elders listen as he recounts Tang's prayer for rain, Fu Hao's victories, and omens sent by heaven. Beyond the fire's glow, the fields stretch into darkness, alive with spirits. In that moment, the Shang world is both history and myth, teaching and remembering, binding people to their ancestors and gods. Looking ahead. In the final part of this series, we will explore the fall of the Shang and the rise of the Zhou, closing our journey through China's earliest dynasties. We will see how the Zhou remembered the Shang, how they justified their conquest, and how the cycle of virtue and corruption continued. Every dynasty carries within it the seeds of its own decline. The Shang, who rose in virtue under Tang the Victorious, eventually faced the same cycle of corruption and downfall that had doomed the Xia before them. Their kings built vast palaces, cast magnificent bronzes, and spoke to heaven through oracle bones. Yet, over time, ritual became excess, devotion turned to indulgence, and kingship grew heavy with arrogance. Out of this decline, a new dynasty emerged, the Zhou, who justified their conquest with one of the most enduring ideas in Chinese history, the mandate of heaven. Tonight, in the final part of our series, we step into the twilight of the Shang and the dawn of the Zhou. We will see how Shang rule faltered, how the Zhou rose from vassals to conquerors, and how the mandate of heaven transformed the memory of both dynasties. The late Shang kings. The Shang dynasty reached its height under kings like Wu Ding, remembered for his wisdom, and for queens such as Fu Hao. But after his reign, the dynasty entered a slow decline. Later kings are described in tradition as increasingly indulgent, cruel, or neglectful of ritual. Oracle bones from the late Shang show continued devotion to divination and sacrifice, but also a growing anxiety. Questions about droughts, defeats, and omens multiplied. The balance between heaven and the dynasty seemed strained. The tyranny of King Zhou of Shang. The last Shang king, known as King Zhou of Shang, not to be confused with the Zhou dynasty, became the archetype of tyranny, much like Jie of Xia before him. Stories tell of his extravagance. A lake of wine so large men could sail on it, forests of meat, hung on trees for endless feasting. He and his consort, Daji, are remembered as cruel and indulgent, delighting in torture and neglecting ritual. These accounts, though moralized by later Zhou writers, serve a clear lesson: when kings abandon virtue, they lose heaven's favor. King Zhou's tyranny became the final act of the Shang, remembered forever as justification for their fall. The rise of the Zhou. The Zhou clan, originally vassals of the Shang, lived in the Wei River Valley to the west. Over time, they grew in strength, building alliances with neighboring peoples. They adopted much of Shang culture, bronze casting, rituals, ancestor worship, but framed themselves as more virtuous and moral. The Zhou leader King Wen was remembered as wise and just, though he died before overthrowing the Shang. His son, King Wu, took up the cause, rallying allies against Shang corruption. the Zhou carefully positioned themselves as restorers of order, not mere rebels. They claimed that heaven itself had withdrawn favor from the Shang and bestowed it upon the Zhou. The Battle of Muye. The decisive clash came at the Battle of Muye, around 1046 BCE. King Wu led Zhou forces against the Shang. Despite being outnumbered, the Zhou had the support of disgruntled allies and, according to tradition, even of Shang troops who defected mid-battle. The Shang army collapsed, and King Zhou retreated to his palace. Realizing the end had come, he set fire to himself, ending his dynasty in flames. This battle became the symbolic turning point, where Shang corruption was punished and Zhou virtue rewarded. The Mandate of Heaven. To explain and justify their conquest, the Zhou articulated a powerful idea, the Mandate of Heaven, Tianming. Heaven grants rulers authority not by birthright alone but by virtue. A ruler who governs justly keeps heaven's mandate. A ruler who turns corrupt loses it, and his dynasty falls. The people's suffering is a sign that heaven has withdrawn its favor. This principle gave moral legitimacy to dynastic change. The fall of the Shang was not treason, it was justice. The rise of the Zhou was not rebellion, it was destiny. The Mandate of Heaven became one of the most enduring concepts in Chinese thought, guiding interpretations of history for over 2,000 years. Memory of the Shang. Though overthrown, the Shang were not erased. The Zhou honored Shang ancestors in ritual, acknowledging their greatness while condemning their final corruption. In this way, the Shang were remembered not as enemies but as part of the lineage of Chinese civilization. Later generations looked back to the Shang as a dynasty of splendor and ritual, their bronzes and oracle bones tangible links to the past. The stories of Fu Hao, Wu Ding, and Tang the Victorious preserved the dynasty's dignity, even as King Zhou's excesses were condemned. Archaeological echoes. Archaeology confirms the outlines of this story. Late Shang sites at Anyang show signs of decline, while Zhou sites in the Wei River Valley reveal growing strength. Weapons, bronzes, and tombs illustrate both continuity and change. The Zhou inherited much of Shang culture but reshaped it under their own ideals. The Mandate of Heaven, though a philosophical construct, was anchored in real political transition, a shift of power from one center to another. The cycle of dynasties. With the fall of the Shang and the rise of the Zhou, the cycle of dynasties became clear. Virtue leads to rise. Corruption leads to decline. Heaven shifts its mandate. This cycle, first seen in the stories of Xia, Shang, and Zhou, became the rhythm of Chinese history. Every dynasty thereafter would see itself in this mirror, fearing the corruption of Jie and King Zhou, aspiring to the virtue of Yu and Tang. Reflection. The fall of the Shang and the rise of the Zhou remind us that history is both fact and lesson. Archaeology shows us battles, bronzes, and tombs. Tradition tells us stories of tyranny, virtue, and heaven's will. Together, they reveal how early China understood itself, a civilization bound not only by power but by morality, where kingship was always conditional, always judged by heaven. Closing image. Picture the battlefield of Muye. Zhou banners ripple in the wind, Shang soldiers waver, storm clouds gather above. In the distance, King Zhou of Shang retreats into his palace, flames rising as his dynasty ends. On the field, King Wu of Zhou kneels, offering thanks to heaven for victory. A new dynasty begins, and with it, a new chapter of Chinese history. Looking back on the journey. From the shadowy Xia to the grandeur of the Shang, from Yu the Great to King Zhou's downfall, we have walked through China's earliest dynasties. We have seen how myth and archaeology intertwine, how ritual and politics merge, how dynasties rise and fall. The story of the Xia and Shang is not only about kings and battles, it is about meaning. It is about how people understood their world, honored their ancestors, and explained change through the Mandate of Heaven. In closing this series, we leave the Shang in twilight and the Zhou in dawn, carrying forward the lessons of virtue, ritual, and cosmic order that shaped Chinese civilization for millennia. Thank you for tuning into this episode of Background Historian. Please subscribe and comment what you'd like to see next if you enjoyed this episode. Background Historian out.